So I'm going to continue in English, and my job today is animateur. So I will both introduce people, but also use in English. I don't know what the the French term for a shepherd's hook is, but to pull people off when their time is up. So I'll try to keep us on track. My first job is to introduce Carl Zimmerer, who I met decades ago when we were both much younger looking, and well, he still has a lot of hair. I don't have much hair anymore. And to my embarrassment, I only recently found out a few personal things about Carl. For any of you Bruce Springsteen fans, Carl grew up a stone's throw from Asbury Park. So if the name Southside Johnny means anything to you, this is your man. And he has actually been to the Stone Pony where Bruce got his start. So two popular cultural facts.
Thank you.
Anyway, many of you will know that Carl is a professor of geography and the former chair of geography at Penn State University, and a formative figure in what many of us study, both in terms of agrobiodiversity, agroecology, and human nature relations. So I'm going to pass it off to Carl. Carl will introduce the basis of the seminar, and then you'll just hear me when I have to tell people to be quiet, I think.
Great. So welcome. Thanks so much, Ken. Thanks so much for being the chair today. Thanks to you all for being here. It's great to see you. We're going to have an interactive. Oh, I need to.
Sorry, you need the mic. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So I'll place myself. Welcome. Great to see everyone. Thanks very much for being here. We'll do an interactive style of event today. I'm really excited about it. Thanks especially to the people on the program and to everyone else. And I'd also especially like to thank MAK'IT for its support for today's event and for the possibility to have this event. So please join me in a small round of applause for the MAK'IT support team. So the program, it's a very full program. It's a 4-hour program. We'll be running it maybe like 8 minutes behind or so. That's up to Ken. And we'll do an introduction. Patrick Caron will introduce the MAK'IT program via a recording that he's generously provided. I'll give a presentation for 45 minutes, which will be followed by comments by Sophie Caillon, and then we'll have a coffee break. And we will have also time for questions and answers and discussion. And then we have a really full second half of the program. Without taking up any more time, Ken's going to go through individual introductions. And so I'm just going to leave that to him. Let me say that the topic for today, biodiversity, food, and nutrition, is really driven by the crises involving biodiversity, the global biodiversity crisis, combined with the global food and nutrition crisis, the entirely tragic and unacceptable reality of nearly 1 billion people being undernourished and hungry. And today's program is actually really at the intersection of these two crises and all of the challenges that go with them, because it's about food and nutrition, but it's also fundamentally about their connection to biodiversity. So we're right in the middle of the connection of these major global challenges, and I think all of the titles, all of the talks, the discussion is going to reflect that. And added to the mix then today are the keywords of migration and urbanization. As I'm sure all of you know, we recently passed the point of more than 1/2 of the world living in urban areas, and that's rapidly growing, projected to be 60% by the year 2030. And at the same time, roughly 2/3 of the world's food supply is coming from just 4 crops or so. So we have these kind of colliding and converging and co-occurring crises. And at the center of them are issues involving food, nutrition, and biodiversity. And in these contexts of urbanization and migration that we'll be talking about. So, so welcome again. Great to have you. Maybe when we go to Patrick, I'll circulate copies of the program to anyone, people who are arriving. And yeah, I want to be sure to mention that we have a coffee break and we have a cocktail hour. So these are key pieces in today's program. Again, everything will be set back by a few minutes, but we'll have a coffee hour midway through, and then the cocktail hour will be in the botanical garden at the end of the event. We think it's going to be a really nice opportunity just to continue interactions. If by chance there's inclement weather, we'll go over to the Botanical Institute, and there's a patio and it has a roof over it, and that's a very beautiful setting too. So I think we have a bunch of plans for that. And so let me, Ken, did you want to say anything about Patrick Caron, or should I just we're going to transition to the director of the MAK'IT program, whom many of you know, Patrick Caron, who is unable to be here, but is traveling, and who has provided a video.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. I'm delighted to welcome you at this at our event here at MAK'IT, Biodiversity, Food and Nutrition amid Migration, Urbanization and Climate Change. That is organized, that has been organized by Carl Zimmerer. We are so happy to host Carl here at MAK'IT in Montpellier. So happy. Carl is a professor of geography at Pennsylvania State University, and is one of the MAK'IT fellows, and we hope that he will share with you. We don't hope. I'm sure he will share with you all his thoughts and his advances and recent advances after having stayed several months here with us in Montpellier. We were so delighted because Carl is a fantastic person, very, very generous, very thought-provoking, always sharing with his colleagues here, and always having led inspiring thoughts, inspiring discussion, and inspiring moments as well. Carl is a specialist of biocultural interaction between food and nutrition issues on the one hand, and agrobiodiversity on the other hand. And as I said, we had the happiness to have him here. He organized this event together with Christian Lecaire from AGAP Mixed Research Unit, where he's hosted, and from Hildis Thomas from SEF Research Unit is co-hosted by the two research units, but he has organized it as well with through many exchanges and many discussions with all MAK'IT fellows during his stay. And this is a very good, very inspiring signal of what does it mean to stay here at MAK'IT. What is MAK'IT? MAK'IT is an institute for advanced studies and for advanced knowledge, as we used to say, by paying attention to other sources of knowledge and just scientific knowledge. And it has been launched in 2019 here in Montpellier, within the University of Montpellier, and together with the academic partners. And if we compare to other Institute for Advanced Studies, it has some specificities. I will not necessarily mention all of them, and invite you to have a look at the website where you can find more information. But let me just mention two or three of these specificities. The first is that a lot of institutes for advanced studies are really focusing on social and human science. And here in Montpellier, we have a wide scope of interdisciplinary exchanges that bring together life sciences, engineering sciences, and social and human sciences. And when it comes to biocultural interaction, I think that Carla has made the right choice to come here in Montpellier, and we were so happy here in Montpellier to have him. Another specificity of MAK'IT is that it encourages and promotes interdisciplinary connections here among the fellows, and this is why I'm so happy that Carl could interact that way to organize this event, but also with the local scientific community, like for example with colleagues in CEF and in AGAP. So the idea is not to work in a silo or in a bubble, but on the contrary, to take advantage of the huge scientific density here in Montpellier when trying to connect feed, protect, and care related challenge. That means agriculture, food, environment, and health challenges. The last specificity I would like to focus on is the fact that we are very keen to look at controversies and how to address controversies with the assumption that divergent views are probably, and polarization are probably one of the main obstacles to move towards sustainable development. And reversely, looking at those controversies might, from our point of view, help in boosting transitions toward sustainable development. Well, I really hope you will enjoy this event. I'm so sorry that I cannot join you today because I'm currently in South Africa, not for the recording of this video, but at the moment where the event is taking place. And I would like to hugely thank MAK'IT team, Thora, Marianne, and Brenda for the support to organize this event. I hope you will enjoy it. I hope you will find it inspiring, and as inspiring as Carl is when he's together with his colleagues, be it around a plate to share with nice cooking coming from Latin America, from Africa, from Europe, or from North America, or when it's about discussing about controversies. Thank you very much. Enjoy this meeting.
Very nice to applaud, even though Patrick can't hear us, I guess, but we'll say thank you to Patrick anyway. So as Carl said, we'll start with Carl's presentation and a spectrum of his thoughts on the issue that we're dealing with today, from the plantation you'll see and pandemic to people's recipes, resilience and crises of biodiversity, food, nutrition, and migration, and urbanization, which is a lot to cover, let's say. And then I'll introduce Sophie, or Sophie here? There you are. I'll introduce Sophie when the time comes. How are you feeling? Sophie has got this head cold that all of us have had. Are you?
Okay, you will see.
We'll see.
So
Okay.
Kate will take the.
Okay. So be prepared for switch outs if things happen. All right, Carl.
Great. Thanks so much, Ken. That was great. That was a fantastic introduction. Thank you. And now may I borrow the microphone?
Oh, sorry. Of course. No.
Thank you. So I am really excited to be here and really grateful for this opportunity to collaborate with this group and to be collaborating in this event. I work at the Environment Society interface, and my work is propelled by the crises in biodiversity and in food and nutrition, and then especially at the interface of the biodiversity, food and nutrition crises. My MAK'IT research this year consists of three main parts that I'll describe today in brief overview. These are the Plantationocene, the pandemic, and recipes. So this research starts with the large context of the Plantationocene, which refers to monoculture-based systems of exploitation of nature and environments, people, and labor, and the accumulation of power, wealth, and capital that occur in this process. And today I'll be really experimenting with the use of the idea of the Plantationocene and its applicability. I'll also be using a case study. This is a case study of southern Spain, the area known as Andalusia, or more generally as Andalus, and the country of Peru, and the connections between these places. And I'll especially be focusing on the development of monocultures. This is at the heart of the idea of the Plantationocene. I'll be talking about the role of colonialism and colonial institutions in driving the formative development of monocultures. I do not mean to say that these are the only monocultures that we're forming or the earliest ones, but these were very formative and influential monocultures that were occurring in these places. And what I think is perhaps most potentially innovative or new in this is I really want to bring agrobiodiversity and the production and consumption of agrobiodiversity into this framework of the Plantationocene, where we see both monocultures, which have been the main preoccupation in thinking about the Plantationocene, together with how the workers and the colonial subjects who lived on the margins of the monocultures were producing diverse food and agriculture for their survival, often at the extreme margins of survival. I'll use the theoretical idea of entanglements, which is something I've been working with for a couple years now, as a way of thinking about these interactions of monocultures and agrobiodiversity, and also recognizing that the perspective of entanglements and interactions across space and time really brings to the fore the importance of migration and movements. This is something that our group of co-organizers has talked about. And in fact, early migrations and movements of plants and animals really set the stage for the Plantationocene in southern Spain, in Andalus, and in coastal Peru. In the case of southern Spain, these were movements that certainly involved Europe. That's kind of mainly what we know about, but also in major ways, they involved North Africa and also West Africa. And in the case of South America, these were movements that involved plants and animals and human migrations going back thousands of years across from the coast to the high Andes Mountains and to the Amazon basin and into Mexico. So this is a view of monocultures and agrobiodiversity that means to put in motion people across places and landscapes as being very their movements being very entangled in this process. And I begin, there are really just 6 slides or so on the Plantationocene, and I begin by zooming in on the area of Andalusia or Andalus. This is an incredibly dynamic area historically. For more than 700 years, it was under Islamic rulers and Islamic influence from North Africa and from the Middle East, and had many influences of plants and agriculture and irrigation in particular. Beginning in the period around the 13 and 1400s, it was invaded and colonized by the Kingdom of Castile. And this is what you see in the map. And the colonial institutions of Castile were involved in all kinds of what today we would call land and water grabs. And so they were grabbing land and water, opening spaces, and there were monocultures that were being developed in significant ways at this time. First wheat, then sugarcane, and then cotton. And so we have a sequence of major monoculture development occurring, while at the same time there really is extraordinary agrobiodiversity in the fields and the gardens of the colonial subjects, who were a very diverse mix of Christianized peasants, mudéjar, who were the Islamic people in the territories of Castile, Moriscos, who had, at least on the surface, converted to Christianity and were in these spaces, and enslaved Africans. So these were the populations of colonial subjects who were the main keepers of agrobiodiverse grains and legumes, woody crops, and there's a whole influx of agrobiodiversity that coexists, often conflicts with the rise of monocultures. And if we zoom into Peru, and especially the coast of Peru, similar time period here, 1300 to 1800. Of course, there's a Spanish invasion and colonialism that starts in 1532, but there's extensive, highly developed agriculture before that. There are amazing indigenous civilizations, first the Moche, then the Chimu, and then the Inca brought all kinds of agricultural technologies and biodiversity. But there's this massive shock, a massive transformation that begins with colonization in 1532. And for the first time, to a more significant degree than previously, monocultures begin to develop. So by the mid-1500s, they're monocultures of wheat, followed by sugarcane, followed by cotton, the same sequence as occurred in southern Spain. Water technologies and irrigation were very tightly interconnected with the development of these monocultures. Migration was massive at this time. These entangled movements of people, including the indigenous genocide, the slavery of enslaved Africans. And at the same time, there's an immense diversity of food in plants and gardens of the people who are providing the labor, working in these fields, working as colonial subjects in these contexts. And it's indigenous plants like Andean maize, Andean potatoes, peanuts, you name it, but also the introduced plants, including exactly the ones that come from Andalus and are shared from Andalus. So this is a history that is tumultuous and in many ways tragic, and it's basically the roots of the plantation scene, and it sets much of this bigger stage for thinking about food and agriculture. I'm going to fast forward for all of one slide to talk about what I call my MAK'IT mini project. So this goes from 1990 to the present. It's much more recent. It's set in the Western Mediterranean, and it looks at monocultures in the form of woody crop monocultures. And there are examples on the screen from Spain and from Morocco. This is a collaboration with Yildiz and Sophie and others from Spain and Morocco, and we're looking at this development of monocultures, including elements such as the intensification of water use in a very significant way, the increased risk to agrobiodiversity. We're focused on agrobiodiverse grains and legumes in this project, and we also looking at the counterforce and the potential hopefulness of farmer and food movements. And I should add, we have southern France is within the realm of this study also. But like I say, that's the mini project. And if I conclude this first part of the talk, the Plantationocene, it basically goes something like this, that the plantation, I have found it very useful to use the idea of the Plantationocene to examine these entanglements of the development of monocultures coexisting and interacting with agrobiodiversity. These are realms that are often treated separately in science and scholarship, and yet I think there are connectivities of people, knowledge, land, labor, conflict and struggles in many, many cases. And these connectivities go to across scales. This really is a global Plantationocene that is starting, and this is a formative period of it. Another thing that I think I'm personally interested in this work, and the very first part of my talk, I need to say, is a very close collaboration with Ramzi Toubey, who is a Peruvian Palestinian who has been involved in this project, and Martha Bell, who they are both either in Peru or closely connected to Peru at the moment. And one of the things that we're finding really interesting and important here is that we feel like we're really trying to make the Plantationocene as something that's more vivid than is often the case. It can tend to be pretty abstractly thought about, at least some of the initial writing. And we're certainly recognizing that it's highly varied. A lot of the Plantationocene writing has basically been on sugarcane in the humid tropics of the Caribbean and Brazil. So we're expanding kind of the view of the Plantationocene. And in looking at these entangled processes, we're really putting a lot of emphasis on the role of production and consumption of agrobiodiversity by these subaltern people, or the colonial subjects, who really relied on agrobiodiversity as a source of resilience and adaptation, while really struggling at the margins and struggling for survival in many, many cases. So this last theme of resilience and adaptation is one that segues into the second part of my MAK'IT research, which is on the pandemic. And so this is research that I'd like to turn to now. It's a case study. It's set entirely in Peru. Peru is a country that was hit incredibly hard by the pandemic. I think the highest mortality rates in the world, some of the most extreme lockdown policies in the world. Those were especially influential in the lives and livelihoods of indigenous people, small farmers, peasant people, less powerful people. And what I'd like to talk about is a case study on how agrobiodiversity functioned in the pandemic. And one of the reasons for choosing Peru is that Peru's kind of paradigmatic of the Plantationocene. It has vast expanses of monocropping. The coast of Peru is a global agro-export zone like almost none other. They're just really large concentrations of monocropped vegetables and fruits and everything that goes on to the global market. While entangled with that is the agrobiodiversity of spaces, especially in the Andes Mountains. And so there's that paradigmatic combination of monoculture and of biodiversity. This research asks a few key questions. So basically, how did this combination of agrobiodiversity and its food and nutrition benefits play a role in the pandemic, or did it? And if so, how? What other processes were possibly influential? And also, can we compare this to the pre-pandemic period? So to do this, I draw on a case study. This is a case study that started in 2016 that I've been thoroughly involved in on basically a day in and day out daily basis over this time period. It's a case study that brackets the pandemic. So it really includes the periods before the pandemic as well as afterwards. And this is an area called Huánuco. So it's in East Central Peru. It's an amazing place. It sits in the high mountains above the Amazon rainforest. It's a global mega diversity center. Every conservation scientist in the world knows about these spaces as among the most biodiversity rich spaces in the world. And our study includes that. There's a map on the left of the screen. It shows the study areas. There's 65 different cultivated plant species. They include 3 species of cultivated Andean potatoes, right? We're all used to 1. They have 3. We're used to 4 varieties. They have 250 varieties. We're used to like 1 kind of corn. They have these Andean maize biodiversity that's extraordinary. Quinoa, multiple squashes, beans. It's just replete with biodiversity. But a big part of our team, shown on the right, is actually food and nutrition specialists. So here we're working with 30 communities in these 3 landscapes. They have the 1, 2, 3 numbers, all kinds of methods in addition to the agrobiodiversity sampling methods. These are food and nutrition methods, survey and focus group methods. The upper photo is a focus group. The surveys and interviews are entirely or almost entirely with women. Many of them are with younger women. The goal here, or the rationale, is that these are the people who are most involved in the food and nutrition of their families. And so learning and helping them in these processes is really important. And we're also motivated by recognition that these global agrobiodiversity centers, where once there was immense biodiversity being grown, and it still is, but these people are not necessarily consuming it. This is like a modern day tragedy. It's a decoupling, it's a disconnection, whatever you want to call it. But basically, the national and global food systems provide some really cheap food that has become about 2/3 of their diet. So about 1/3 is still locally produced and consumed, but 2/3, and I think this is typical of many parts of the world. And so kind of understanding dynamics in this context is really important to us. So this is the pre-pandemic. We used a model called the Agrobiodiversity Knowledge Framework, the AKF framework. It looks at the connections between agrobiodiversity off on the left side of the diagram and food and nutrition off on the right side. The statistics shown here are basically the positive influences of plant and livestock diversity on such dietary indicators as dietary diversity and richness. So the more diversity people have in their fields, the more they're eating. So this is interesting. Even though it's roughly 1/3, you can see that 34% figure, it's having beneficial impacts. We've also looked at the reciprocal relationship in the other direction, where the consumption of more local foods, the consumption of a higher percentage of traditional food, has a positive impact in terms of people's diversity. So in other words, diversity creates nutritional benefits, food customs, elevate the amount of diversity that's being grown. We think of this as a coupled system in the lingo of systems modeling and of social ecological modeling. This is a coupled system. But I think what I really want to highlight is only partly coupled. It's only 34% coupled. The other 2/3 of what these people are consuming is coming through purchased food and the national and global food system. And that's a good segue to the pandemic, because that 2/3 gets cut off. It gets shut down. There's no access to it. These rural areas were subjected to just extreme lockdown. So what we've done is just created or recreated oral histories of what people did during this time period, worked with them as close to the time period as possible. And to make a really long story short, and I really do mean a really long story, it's almost 1,000 pages of transcribed interviews and focus groups of different types. In many ways, this is just a phenomenal story of agrobiodiversity resilience. These people lost access to bread, they lost access to rice, they lost access to cooking oil, they lost access to sugar, and they used agrobiodiverse ingredients to replace all of those. It was like an agrobiodiversity triumphant story, and that it's enabled their survival. And they gladly and very proudly kind of detail how that worked. It was very much social learning. There was a lot of sharing that went on. Fermentation became more common. This is one of their favorite foods. There's a fermented potato with super probiotic properties. They did a lot of sharing and made that more widespread. And then it's just all these innovative ways of consuming local plants that were relied on. And in our research, it was very interesting because at first this just blew us away. And I mean, it still does in many ways, but this was our main impression, like, wow, such an impressive, innovative, creative success story. But then as time went on, and also as we just kind of went more and more in depth, it turns out that there were also there was worsening vulnerability and external crises. So these are already vulnerable populations. They're poor people. They don't have many resources. Many of them depleted all of their resources during the pandemic. There were medical costs, or they talked about their kids needing phone cards to do online education. They sold all their animals. They emptied out whatever cash savings they had. That's like us emptying out our bank accounts to zero. So these are devastating shocks. And in using this resilience idea, it was really interesting because people did talk about trying to recover after having depleted all those. And they would use the word in Spanish, recuperar. So literally they kind of had a sense of like wanting to bounce back, but they weren't bouncing back. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. One of them is this just very steep increase in the price of fertilizers. So the pandemic goes with maritime kinds of restrictions. The pandemic goes with rapid rise in energy costs, and fertilizer prices go up by 4 or 5 times. And this is such a devastating blow. Interestingly, people do know about agroecological techniques, and they're willing to and they do adopt them, but at the same time, they're challenged in doing that all of a sudden. You can't adopt agroecological soil management like on a dime and turn a system around. So these were very major challenges. And so combined, then I want to say that there's kind of this combination of resilience and also with vulnerability. Thank you. Vulnerability and crises. We can briefly go back to kind of bright spots in this. And also the role of movements and migrations being so entangled once again. I don't know if some of you may have heard this, but in Peru and to varying degrees elsewhere, but maybe especially in Peru due to the extremeness of some of these shocks, people no longer had work, housing, or food in cities, and they went back to rural communities. And often they did this on foot, and it would be hundreds of kilometers. And so we interviewed people who had walked up to 400, 500 kilometers, including over the 14,000 foot, 3,500, 4,000 meter passes of the Andes to get back to these communities. So they get back. Agrobiodiversity is amazing in this context. It's how they got food. It's how they got seed. It's how they shared knowledge. There's an incredible like reinvigoration of local knowledge and what it means for food, but it's pretty short term. This was a short-term re-agrarianization. It was not a long-term. So it's a short-term kind of situation. So let me conclude the second part on the pandemic and also mention, which I don't think I did, that with the collaborators in Peru, and especially to highlight my collaboration with Alejandro Diaz, who is an anthropologist at one of the main universities in Lima, also Ramzi Toubé again, and also Christy Mesa, who you saw in some of those photos. We have a group will be presenting a seminar paper on this that we've developed in September in Peru. I think these conclusions, these are mainly points that I've already mentioned. I would like to briefly touch on a couple points involving the role of the Peruvian state here, which turns out to be really interesting. It wasn't the initial main focus of this project, but it's an important interaction. And it's really forms of these communities contesting the role of the Peruvian state. Food aid institutions have become increasingly common in these landscapes. So these are government food aid programs, often through school food programs, but they're hotly contested in terms of what kind of food they provide, how they provide it, when they provide it, if they provide it, all those kinds of things. So we're really interested here in integrating that process with our other analysis. We also recognize that the contesting of the Peruvian state is really important in terms of the indigenous protests that have been occurring in Peru during the last 9 months that have been very strong. There was a peak of those in January. I was in Peru during the month of January. These were really historic protests, political crisis of the state, in many ways, very much a political qua politics crisis. It's electoral politics, it's politics. But what we're suggesting in this work is that there's a subsistence crisis that's intersecting with the political crises as part of these processes. So I'd like to pass now to the third part of my talk, and I'm at about 30 minutes, so 15 minutes, perfect, thank you. So this is the last third of the talk. The migration and urbanization theme is woven with the study of recipes. And I want to say that migration and urbanization has been really important in this work. It's been something that people I work with and I myself have just been really focused on for about 15 years. And the reason is that we live in a massively urbanizing world. There are urban specialists who say there's planetary urbanization. There's no such thing as the rural anymore. That's being provocative and overstating it probably, but still urbanization influence is really, really extensive. And in this work for quite a while, what I've been doing is really looking for the bright spots, for the conditions under which migration and urbanization can have these kinds of positive, beneficial interactions with biodiversity and food situations, because often it's negative. So this is kind of acknowledging right away that there are many, many negative impacts that come from migration and urbanization on biodiversity and food. But that's not uniform. It's not 100%. And it's important to find those bright spots of where it can be positive and understand how and why. And so one of the first projects from 2013, 10 years ago, went really quickly, was on migrants in central Bolivia who actually, their households have the highest levels of agrobiodiversity. So we worked on how is it that these migrants sent remittances, still valued agrobiodiversity, had secure tenure rights, still wanted biodiversity in their food in these local spaces, and also sent to them abroad in places like Spain where they live and work. And then really recently, we've done work on seed systems. These are informal seed systems or local seed systems that carry most of the world's agrobiodiversity. And one of the really interesting, intriguing results is that they are most common closer to cities. So this is a study of 11 countries, 257 county level units, and we're finding this use of informal seed at the highest rates in the jurisdictions closest to cities. So this is my way of providing some conceptual background to say, let's not give up on migration and urbanization. We're living in a world that's massively moved in this direction, and we really need to and should find ways that it's working with and for people and how to support and develop that. So one of the main ways that I can think of to do this is with recipes. And this has been a big part of my MAK'IT research. This is basically the data that I brought to MAK'IT, is 3 data sets on recipes that have been elicited through something called the 24-hour food recall technique. These are big data sets. They're roughly 1,200 different recipes, more than 20,000 lines of data when you break it down to the level of the ingredients. And we have these data sets for 2017 and 2022. And in January of 2023, we took the same techniques and worked with people's family members in the capital city of Lima, 11.5 million people. What happens to recipes when you have migration and urbanization in these contexts? So I'm going to talk a little bit about this recipe research. And here I've been working with Christian, and we've developed a few different conceptual frameworks to think about and work on this data. One of them is a multi-level framework where we think about recipes at both kind of a finer grain, where you think about ingredients within recipes. In our data sets, we can associate that with species and cultivars and biodiversity. It's also geocoded. We could take it to the landscape level and think about the spaces where the biodiversity is being produced. And then it goes also to the coarser grain of recipe categories and ingredient categories. So kind of the grouping together of recipes. We also frame this data in terms of demographic variables. What are potential roles of demographic factors like age and gender, and also landscape characteristics. And I introduced the landscape previously. I'll go into it a little bit more here. I mean, I am interdisciplinary environmental scientist and environmental social scientist, but I am definitely also a geographer, so I tend to kind of overdo it on my maps here. But this is basically our study landscape of, or our study area of 3 landscapes, 1, 2, and 3, and they are distinguished by different urbanization influences, different migration levels, and we also characterize them in terms of elevation range, since we have that information, and that can play a really important role. So these are like our conceptual frameworks, how we analyze our thoughts in terms of thinking about approaching the data. Now, in approaching the data, so far it's definitely at this exploratory phase of data analysis, but we're using 2 general approaches, characterization and association. So the characterization process involves looking at recipes and characterizing them in different ways, including the diversity, the ingredient diversity of recipes. And what you have on the left of the slide are recipes for 3 of the most common soups. So there, I think we have 27 types of soup recipes. These are 3 really common ones. You can see the number of ingredients on the x-axis, the frequency at which they occur. So those are the soups on the left. On the right are ghissos, which are stews. And so the stews fit into the general recipe category of kind of main dishes or main plates. There are about 250 of these recipes, approximately. About 10 or 15 of them are these ghissos. And one of the important characteristics is just how the range of ingredient diversity between 2 and 16 in the soups compares to a much smaller range of ingredient diversity in the stews. So the soups end up to be this very kind of versatile kinds of combinations and more extensive levels of diversity. And honestly, all of this was a surprise to me, because one of my mentors had told me, and I think this is often how we tend to think about it. She told me, she said, before I started this, she said, the idea of a recipe among indigenous people or peasant societies or whatever is something that doesn't vary. And the quotes even go with this. I mean, this is a quote from January where this person's like, yeah, I learned the recipe from my mother. It's the exact same. That's like an ideal, and it functions as an ideal. But the super fascinating thing about this 24-hour recall data is the reality. And so the reality ends up being really an interesting and important comparison and contrast to the ideal. So this is the characterizing approach. And then we also have this association approach of associating food groups, associating recipes with the landscapes that I had mentioned earlier. So the map on the left, these are pie charts of the food groups, like fruit and vegetables are the red ones, the different food groups are different colors. And I mean, we've gone through this in detail, and these are really similar across all the landscapes. Thank you. And so this similarity is really, it's noteworthy. To some extent, it probably reflects the connections to markets and to the national and global food systems. These are not like food groups where little local microenvironments result, or a situation where little local microenvironments result in different food groups. General food groups are the same, but there are some differences in terms of whether recipes are locally more or less common. So that's kind of interesting, because it means people have many of the same inputs in terms of general food groups, but they might be creating locally higher or less high levels of certain recipes. And one of the interesting observations here is that it's landscape 3, way off in the, not way off, but significantly to the east, and with really distinct lower urbanization influence and a different kind of migration that tends to have the most distinct sort of recipe occurrences. So we're like right now, I'm thinking a lot about what might some of these urbanization and migration influences be that would be associated with local differentiation of recipe occurrences. And so next to last slide, we're looking here at analyzing another aspect of diversity, beginning with just ingredient diversity. So this is a major thing for agrobiodiversity policy scientists, scholars. How do we understand ingredient diversity, which is how people's eating drives diversity? And it is positively related to age and to gender, meaning women have higher levels of diversity in their recipes. There are male-headed households, so we do have like a significant representation of men in the sample. And also there's an inverse relation to distance to city. So as an urbanization project, this is another really interesting thing, that there's higher ingredient diversity closer to cities, presumably a role of markets coming into play. On the left is like going even deeper into some of this analysis. We use the sopa de pollo recipe as like kind of our test recipe for a lot of stuff. And it's really a lot of its characteristics are very similar between landscapes 1 and 2 and different once again in landscape 3. So still working out like the processes that are involved there. So this is how I'd like to conclude the talk. Briefly say that I think that recipes are a predominant form of knowledge and of practice, that they link diversity to the environment and to society, and they're a potentially powerful tool at the science policy interface. They're part of everyday practice, they're quotidian, and there are all kinds of ways of thinking about programs and policies at the science policy interface to support recipes. Working my way backwards towards the front of the first part of the talk, I reflect on the pandemic by saying that it's this combination of resilience and adaptation with vulnerability and crises that really distinguishes the situating of agrobiodiversity and its functioning, that was both like really positive and remarkable and yet limited. And from a concept and theory viewpoint, I use social and political ecologies to do that. And then to the very first part of the talk, last conclusion, the plantation as seen, I think offers a very useful conceptual tool for looking at these entangled monoculture agrobiodiversity dynamics, thinking about the combination of colonial institutions and power and marginalized groups and this flux of migration and movements and resistance and vulnerability. And finally, I just have a whole host of acknowledgements to be sure to recognize. These are the stakeholder groups that I work with, the working group collaborators that I'm with. I definitely want to recognize my collaborators and colleagues at CEF and at AGAP through the MAK'IT program. And I also want to be sure to recognize the community groups and researchers in various places, especially in Peru in this talk, and and through to various other groups and settings. These are really important people in all of these projects.
Thank you, Carl, for an extraordinarily provocative talk that generates all kinds of ideas and connections, and for being a role model. Right? I'm sure all of you have sat in the presentation where it's supposed to be 45 minutes. Turns out to be an hour and a half. That was 45 minutes. That's what 45 minutes. So I'd like to introduce a friend and colleague, Sophie Graillon, who is a director of geography at Zimmerer'S, but also an ethno-ecologue at the Centre d'Écologie Fonctionnelle et Évaluative at Zimmerer'S in Montpellier. Sophie has a long history of working in Vanuatu on agroecology and social relations in small-scale, largely subsistence communities. But, as I've learned, she's been working with Scott Prudhomme and I on a project on agrarian change in the lands in vineyards of southern France. Has this amazing capacity to transfer knowledge from one context to another and draw all kinds of fascinating connections. And it's been an absolute pleasure to work with Sophie at CEP over the last few months and for the next 3 months. Anyway, Sophie, so Sophie will discuss sort of her thoughts on some of Carl's work, but also pose some questions and hopefully engage in a bit of a dialogue with Carl.
It's more, thank you very much, Ken, for your introduction. No, yes, it is here. It's working. Yeah. So it's not really comments, it's more questions, more into conversation with Carl, as you put, and I will read a little bit. And as you have seen, I'm a little bit sick. So if I'm totally suffocate here, maybe somebody can take my text and read it in my place. Thank you. Yes, so Carl, for me, is one of the most productive and influential contemporary interdisciplinary scholars of the global geographies and political ecologist. He is a specialist of food and food production with particularly emphasis on questions concerning agrobiodiversity. The impact of his work is significant and far-reaching. Like many others, I have drawn from Carl's work. Now that he has been here for some months as a visitor, it seems a good moment to consider how he does what he does. And how exactly does what he does relate to what we do individually in our various collaborations, conceptually and methodologically. What I have learned from Carl during the few months we shared in Montpellier is that he values long periods of fieldwork. He develops rooted and grounded approaches. He is not shy in committing himself to mixed methods approaches, integrating qualitative and quantitative data and analysis. To summarize, he is a geographer who values ethnography and understands the broader role of institutions. So my first question will deal with the discipline, geography, of course, and its role in dealing with environmental issues. In the literature of sustainability science, papers based on multiple site studies are dominant. Do you believe that it is feasible to upscale results from a very localized case studies? I think it is an interesting question for young scholars who could be pushed to multiple their field experience across the world. Do you think that a geographer could theorize or push the frontiers of concepts used in the field only by conducting long-term observation on the same place? One challenge of multi-sited ethnography is the time needed at each site. One way to solve this is through more collaboration, but collaborative ethnographic work is itself a challenge. What to do? More globally, how can geography interact in a more productive way with the emergent field name sustainability science? What are the specificities of geographers, their strength, when the goal is the research is to better understand hybrid objects that are both nature culture, social culture, such as crops and food and their associated recipes, as you talk about. First question, after, yeah.
Yeah, do you want to get going with questions?
No.
I'm just coming up here because Tara told me to.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
I'm not. So if you
push me away.
if you- no,
Too many
no,
questions.
no, you should stay,
Yeah.
but do you want to ask more? Or do you want to just?
No, I think it's good we stop.
Okay,
And
I think-
after I will modulate how many questions
Fantastic.
I will ask
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
I have a lot.
So that's such a great question about research design and about multi-site and long-term design and roles of collaborations. I think that my ideas about this are very, to go to almost the deepest level, I think of myself in many ways as what I call a critical pluralist. And so by being a pluralist, it means that I'm willing to engage both social ecological approaches, for example, which might tend to be more cross-site approaches, as well as deeply ethnographic approaches. I still remember and still hold dear this certain coinage of field techniques that I'm pretty sure. I would apply it to geography, but I think it comes from anthropology, and I think it comes from Clifford Geertz, where he referred to deep hanging out. And so I certainly recognize the value of those approaches. So part of critical pluralism for me is recognizing the value and the applicability of these different approaches in different contexts and different problems, different opportunities. And also part of critical pluralism for me is that I don't have like a single monolithic theoretically driven approach to research design, right? A theoretical specialist in subarea X, Y, or Z might really take that to like a very singular view of a certain research design. For me, critical pluralism opens up this kind of constellation of possibilities. It certainly doesn't mean that anything or everything is necessarily good. Each one needs to be really rigorously, carefully evaluated. The connections between research design and research theory are always paramount. So you want to have coherency and compelling kinds of connections between your theory and your site design. But I would really push back on the idea of there being kind of singular solutions to doing that. And I really appreciate your bringing this up, Sophie, because I feel like it's something that we don't talk about nearly enough. And sometimes there almost is kind of assumptions that there might be kind of a singular solution out there that we could all potentially gravitate to or should gravitate to. But in reality, I think that's exactly what we should not gravitate to.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much. You answer part because a lot of our students and young scholars are really struggling with this kind of question right now. So thank you, Trevor, your opinion. And after the second thematic I wanted to develop was about adaptation, resilience, transformation. And so you talk a lot about that after people experience a named risk, the COVID, the pandemic, and about the importance of looking to multiple sources and types of risk that could emerge after a major crisis. So I really thank you for the detailed analysis you have presented that underlines the importance of long-term research, once again, applying always to that. Through the program MAK'IT, you have chosen to join a laboratory mainly populated by ecologists, the CEF. So first question, have you questioned the CEF ecologist about their definition of resilience? And do you agree with their definition? Is it a suitable concept to integrate social and ecological feature? And how can we incorporate the complexity of local and global processes within the concept of resilience? And second question on resilience is, what kind of concept or methodology could a geographer such as you can steal from the ecologist regarding the research on resilience? I'm thinking, for example, of approaches based on fitness that is expressed in a given environment, for example, but you can tell me what you want.
Okay, great. Well, I mean, thanks again, Sophie, for such a question. Can I put your mic?
Sorry.
No problem. So another super stimulating, interesting question. I mean, I had such a loaded question asking about my research hosts and what they do. But seriously, I mean, I haven't spoken with them directly, but I do read their publications, and there are people in CEF who've been and are really active and influential in this area of resilience. I think I see. I guess I'll say I have a, just right out front, say I have a partial, incomplete, and imperfect understanding of resilience. But you asked what I think, so I'll tell you what I think. So I think that the ecologist and the biological side has a lot of really kind of advanced knowledge about this, using measures, like you say, like fitness, which in some ways is ultimately it's an evolutionary concept. It's an ecological concept. It's about survival at some level. And so it really provides a very kind of coherent measure of outcomes. You can take a plant population and you can look at the ones that are resilient to a shock in the next population. Mm-hmm. So as I think that those are very, very important systems and very important frameworks. I think the challenges become very, very considerable when we move to social ecological resilience. That ideas of fitness from biology can become very, very problematic if you try to incorporate them sort of simplistically into a social environment. You could go right to a Darwinian kind of social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. So I'm not saying anyone's doing that, but that's the risk in a way. And there are potentially much more subtle ways that could happen. So I think the challenges for social ecological ideas of fitness are very, very considerable, because that evolutionary ecological barometer of fitness disappears, right? That's such an elegant system. And you cannot easily, ethically, social justice wise, move that into communities of people. So I'm not saying it's entirely impossible. I think it's really interesting to think about what it might look like from perspectives incorporating justice and ethics, but it would be, of course, so different than a completely biological fitness type of model. So I think in the world of social ecological resilience, I think there are just lots of really interesting challenges. I think the one that I tried to respond to in this talk and in this work and in the seminar coming up in Peru, and I have to write the manuscript within a week, so it's really been on my mind a lot, is how like, I think resilience can be like adaptation, as it was once critiqued by Michael Watts and others, which is it becomes a tautological explanation. Everything that is somehow adapted. That's how it exists. And resilience can have a similar sense, like everything has some resilience. We wouldn't be here. None of us would be here if we weren't somehow resilient in certain ways and stuff. So for me, what I'm doing in this work is thinking about limits of resilience, interactions of resilience with crises. These are basically like limits of resilience, and maybe it's like an intersectional view of resilience, where resilience intersects with these other important factors rather than sort of being an isolated thing on its own. So that's a very partial answer, but that's what I've been trying to do in this work.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very much. It precise what you explained us. So thank you very much. So now I'm just asking you to travel a little bit to Vanuatu in my field work. So it's in the South Pacific. And while I was there, I knew that I was fully integrated as a member of the family who hosted me. When they finally, after eating chicken, etc., but finally they served me cold taro from the night before for breakfast. When they did not prepare my lunch anymore, so I had to find something to eat. And when I switched to a totally vegetarian menu on a daily basis, because meat is scarce and reserved for great occasions. So if I wanted to eat crayfish, I just had to go and catch them. So all the nice recipes, after I made a booklet with a lot of recipes in it. And all the recipes that I collected for this big booklet were needed a long preparation with special ingredients. So daily food is totally different from special occasions menu. Food, and especially when we are interested in diversity of food, expresses differently in space and in time. We need to be present in the field site for long periods of time to fully document diet, ingredients, frequency, and modes of preparation. So if I have understand you ask people what they have eaten the day before. So it's foods in majority concerning daily food. So what would you expect if you were working on special occasion food recipes instead of daily food? And in particular, would they be so different from an idea as you present here? Do you think you had the same distance with the idea?
So I think, Sophie, that's such an interesting question. And I honestly am just not sure. I could see either answer, that maybe just like you're saying, special occasion foods are almost ideal recipes. That's what makes them a special occasion food. That's like what my academic training wants to tell me. And because people talk about special occasion foods, they're highly diverse. They're extraordinarily important for agrobiodiversity. They're shared, they're highly social. So one of the things that, is so important is that social food can have like standardizing norms associated with it. So that might function like normatively, it's being shared. Everyone wants the same ingredients and they're going to notice if you go messing around with the ingredients. That's what like 2/3 of me is telling me. And the other 1/3 is telling me, if we really look at that, it's going to be like the rest of the recipes. They're playing around with the diversity and types of ingredients because they just don't have everything, or they just like, they're improvising. They had more of X or Y. They'll still get it by as a special occasion food, but it's going to have versatility and like variation, like right at the margins, barely noticeable, but would be really interesting. So for me, it's just an empirical question, I guess, but one that gets at a lot of the talk. So thank you for, that's awesome.
Maybe, how long do I have?
2 minutes. So maybe we should just go to Or if you want to say some concluding comments.
I have only 2 minutes. Wow. Okay. So yes, so maybe my special conclusion. So it's in fact also listening to you, the term hierarchy emerges in all our research dealing with food, especially if agrobusiness is included in the game. So this relation of power that we struggle to disentangle are translated within the concept of equity, environmental, and social justice. So to conclude, I will make the difficult exercise to link these concepts to your more personal biography, that I have two completely secret and anonymous informators who almost small information. So yes, I have heard that you born in the USA, you born down in a dead man's town, more exactly. So in, as Ken say, next to a pub named Stone Pony. So I have a very important question at the end. So concerning power relations. So more exactly, is it true that in all places and across all scales that poor man wanna be rich, rich man wanna be king, and the king client satisfied, still he rules everything.
Touche.
So this is a song of Bruce Springsteen song's name, Balance.
That's a concluding note. If ever was a concluding note. Thank you, Sophie. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. So we have 25 minutes for questions. We have questions for the audience. Stay up. Yeah, why not? Yeah. Whoops.
Because we're going to do questions, so you and I can be up here for this.
So we also have an, oops. We also have an online audience. So why don't we, in contravention of normal practice, start with a question from the online audience, and then we'll come back inside house.
Yes, so we have a question from Bill Mosley, who is asking you, Carl, are there signs of the nutrition transition in the recipes your team collected? In other words, are more urban and or wealthy households using more purchased or processed ingredients in the recipe, or are Peruvian resisting the nutrition transition? And there is another question. Are forage ingredients part of the recipes of rural households?
Thanks. Hey, thanks for both of those questions. Thanks to each of you, and thanks so much to Bill Mosley for that first question. The work we've done so far with correlations with household wealth, which is a really good and interesting idea to relate to the recipe data, has not shown a correlation between wealth and ingredient diversity. That's what we've looked at so far. We have not looked at possible linkages between it's household income data. So as I said, this is a work in progress. What I think there are two steps here that are part of our plans. One is just what Bill Mosley suggested, which is that household income data could be related to more purchased type ingredients as opposed to self-grown ingredients. My prediction there would actually be a little bit of a mixture, by the way, too, because in our other studies of food agrobiodiversity interactions, we have found that it's both the wealthiest households and the poorest households that tend to grow and consume the most agrobiodiversity. The wealthiest ones do it because it tastes better and they have the options. The poorest ones do it because they really don't even have the income to commercialize improved varieties. So that would actually be an interesting test. It'd be statistically interesting because we'd be checking to see if maybe there were kinds of inflections in that curve. The other thing that's part of this future work is to work with composite wealth measures. So if you've worked with data on rural households, many households, honestly, you know that for very good reason, people tend not to want to tell you what their monetary income has been. And so that's the easiest part of the data to work with. It's where we've started, but in many ways, it's less reliable. So there are ways of compiling household wealth indices that account for livestock and land and all of that. And that would be another future step. So I'm responding like affirmatively, but with saying that initially we don't have any correlation, but it's just with the income data and it's just with ingredient diversity. So it really can and should be part of this study. And the second question about foraged foods, that's such a great question. Yes, wild food is a really important part of this study. And these are cultivated landscapes, but they have plenty of wild spaces. And so wild plant foods, as well as hunting and also fishing. It's not far from the Amazon basin. People bring wild caught fish from the Amazon. So there's all kinds of foraging and wild food inputs into this diet. And that is just another one of these still to be worked on parts of the large size data sets that exist here. But really good point.
Thanks, Carl. Okay, inside. So perhaps you could introduce yourself and your affiliation and your question.
So thank you, Carl. I'm Ajeng. I'm part of the MAK'IT, and I'm an anthropologist. And so thank you very much for the great presentation. First of all, I want to compliment on the idea of critical pluralist, because I think it's very important, because I believe that we are all trapped in this kind of, just labeled as an academic methodological work, just to kind of, just pick, just one strand of work and not being open to many diverse. But then I want to question about the field work that you do and the knowledge that is produced. How much of collaboration and the knowledge of the locals are, just integrated? And then how much of this knowledge actually goes back to them? How much they get, just a proportion of that knowledge that you produce? I would be thankful to know that.
Great, thank you.
Such a great question. So a really lot of this knowledge actually does go back, and it goes back in the form of nutrition knowledge. This is the first time I've ever worked with teams of nutritionists, and it's kind of amazing because everyone wants to know what a nutritionist can tell them about eating better and being more healthy. And you have almost an immediate buy-in and backflow of information. And these are nutritionists who have worked in these communities for a really long time. So Christy Mesa, who I talked about, the young woman in the first photographs, her senior colleague Hillary Creed-Kaneshiro, and my colleague, has been working in Wanoko for like 30 years. So these communities are ones where the community members appreciate ideas about how their foods can be combined in more nutritious ways. And that's just a very active discourse and a very productive one. And I guess the other part of that would be like how, to me, it introduced me and has really like transformed me in a way to realize how substantial their discourses and ideas and knowledge are, not just about food and nutrition, but how it overlaps with health. They are so much interconnected. And I think, again, that's where a lot of the the information sharing occurs too, because people have a genuine interest in the health of themselves, but also in the case of these women, including young mothers, it's often children. So there's just a really lot of information sharing in these contexts. And that, and again, I guess maybe part of this is just to say, I really do think different projects, of course, have different kinds of information sharing and usefulness. So that's the form that it takes in this project.
Thanks, Carl.
Yeah.
Nice save.
Hi, I'm Sergio Schneider from Brazil. I'm also a MAK'IT fellow. So, Carl, great presentation. I really appreciate. I just would like to comment and ask, maybe you could also elaborate a little bit more on the implications and the consequences of this research in terms of policy making. Latin America was one of the first regions that achieved the Millennium Goals. Reduction of hunger in Latin America, especially South America, was one of the greatest achievements that from the region in comparison with other places in the world. But if we see the last, let's say, 10 years, it's the region where in the world hunger goes back more rapidly than any other regions in the world. It's amazing that in the region, in the whole region, we have now again more of 100,000 of people suffering from hunger and food insecurity. So what we can learn from your presentation, and what maybe we can take from that in order to advise policy making? I really like the point that if you look at most of the governments and policymakers, they always came up with the conclusion that, well, we have to give people more money in order that they can buy the food, because the problem is not, especially in Latin America and in Peru, the problem is not that there is no food. The problem is that people have no money to buy food. What your research show us is that beyond giving people the affordability to can buy the food, to can access the food, which is one of the key dimensions of food security, and I'm not denying that, the problem is a little bit further, as you show. The problem is how you know about food, the recipes, because you have to have a knowledge about the food. You have to keep how this cultural transmission and symbolic dimension of the food is come from, and the kind of ingredients to prepare this kind of food. So I would really ask you that you and your group maybe elaborate a little bit more on using that databases to questioning the policy making and the general understanding that to overcome food insecurity, the issue is just to provide accessibility or affordability, but issues goes far more beyond, which is the knowledge about food, the understanding what is the meaning of the food, and how people really managed the recipes and access to food. So thank you.
Search.
Thank you so much, Sergio. What a great question, and or set of questions. That they're really important, and I think what you're saying is so true. This is what you've already said, but when we first started in 2016 and we were looking at food and nutrition insecurity rates in these communities and these places in the mountains in Peru, and remember I said this was paradigmatic of the Plantationocene, and this is like the impoverished kind of situation. The rates are like they're like the worst in the world. This is in a country that went up to middle income status. But the point is that both over time, but over space, I guess, is what I'm adding. That spatially, there are spaces too, where there's just really high levels of food and nutrition insecurity. And so I think what this work is suggesting, and there are people in this room who probably have more concrete ideas about this than I do, but I think I have a few. They're pretty specific, but they'd go like this. I think that nutrition and food sides of what goes on with agriculture need to be far more linked in policy and programs in the field. That the kind of productivist approach to food production that doesn't think at all about food quality or its potential local usefulness or its nutritional kinds of benefits, that's just standard, and that's almost everywhere. And I think that what this work really has the information to suggest and guide us on is how do we think about development or agronomy in a way that nutrition is right up there with yield. And then the other part of that would be the importance of diversity in these situations. So it would be a much more integrated approach to designing the kinds of agricultural policies that are predominant in these places that integrate and link to these very kind of daily importances of the usefulness of food. And the other thing I'd say is that we shouldn't, I know you're not saying this, but maybe it could be thought that we should just potentially like not even think about this or give up on it in a way, because it's only 1/3 of their food that's being produced by themselves and 2/3 is coming from purchased food. But what I think is so important about the results so far in the Journal of Nutrition paper that got published 2018, and we had a rebuttal and a really interesting exchange with a critic, is that 1/3 of food is making a difference nutritionally. It's like what economists talk about things making difference at a margin. It's not the predominant bulk of what people grow, but that important but nonetheless minor fraction is creating a tangible nutritional benefit. And I think that we need to incorporate those kinds of insights too.
Thanks, Carl. Perhaps we could take a couple more online questions. Is there? Okay. Other questions? Sorry. Very good.
Thank you, Carl, for this great presentation. And also, I have the privilege to be your colleague during the MAK'IT. Sorry, my name. My name is Viviana Bilbao. I am another fellow of MAK'IT program this year. And well, it was a privilege to have you in our group, because we invite him to think in deep, not only to have new information, revealing information, but also to think in plurality of the meaning of the knowledge. Many things to make questions and to share comments. But I would like to congratulate on the way you present the process of the loss of biodiversity in this topic, no? The effects of colonization that not only affect the agrodiversity, but also, you know, in my case, fire management and other ways to perceive and to manage the nature. One of the, after hearing you, is for me is clear, it may be so obvious, but for me the first time, that the problem is the plantation related with colonization, with the object to increase the amount, independent of the nutritional value or the offer, is the amount to supply food. But it's interesting because the traditional communities, local communities, the base of agrobiodiversity is to improve the use of resources, the fertility of soils, but also to provide food along the year. When you have the plantation, you have a big offer in one moment of the year. but what happened the rest of the year? So the base of the biodiversity in South America or Latin American original communities is to improve the resources and also to provide along the year. So many centuries later, the problems continue, because the problem, if you have high amount, you have to buy them, so you have to go in the market. If you have, one of the announcements you said in your presentation is one of the farmers said, I don't have enough fertilizers to have a great amount of food to sell. It's impossible to go in the market if you focus. And agrobiodiversity probably reduce the probability to go in the market and to have a benefit. So it's a controversy that is very, very difficult to solve until now, especially because you said the diversity sustain the health of the population. If you have more diversity of crop, you have a healthy community. So it seems that all the policies in Latin America to solve the economic problem is not going to provide a solution. No, another way, we have an ethical problem when you are in the anthropological and working with traditional communities. We have the commitment to support the prevalence of the traditional knowledge, the cultural heritage. So, in your experience, maybe in the same line that Sergio and Arshan, we have the same problem with fire management. How we change policies, how we our knowledge can provide solutions to a critical problem of course, of nutrition of the population and to solve the hunger. So sorry for this long question, but what do you think? What is the way to find a solution? Is economical solution to give people more money to buy food, or how changes in the society we need to foster in order to find a more permanent and just equality and ethics solution? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Viviana, for that excellent and wonderfully thought-provoking question. There's a lot to potentially unravel and think and respond to there. But what my mind's really gravitating towards is actually when I was preparing the quotes for the slides, to the one that I didn't include, or one. One of the several that I didn't include, and it's this most incredibly reflexive kind of reaction that one of the focus groups had, where one of the members of the focus group says, you know, we're just on this productivist treadmill. We just totally need to socially and economically redo production. Instead of trying to produce more, which is where your comment started, we need to be thinking about producing quality. And so, like, really just fundamentally socially and economically rewiring and redoing and reworking these systems. That's a very idealistic notion, but it's coming right from the voice of one of the people there, and that person's not alone. So I think in terms of broader solutions, certainly supporting those visions, those ideas, those groups, that was that was from the focus group of 11 community leaders. So it's someone who's in a position of some leadership, and I think that those are really key ways to start massive rethinking. And yes, I mean, as a scientist and scholar, I do have like my own ways, but I really like rooting my response right now in just that quote that's still on the top of my mind from this morning or yesterday when I was looking for quotes, because that was really just from the grassroots up, someone thinking about just really needing to radically redo production away from plantation type influences. They didn't use that word, but in the direction of quality and lesser production. And I think that they're really interesting and important ideas there, and supporting those is key for us.
Just to have a comment on this, thank you for the question. I think we are desperate because we worked on agrobiodiversity for so many years, and the politics never heard us. And I think you pronounce a very having you here broaden my ideas and the way to approach agrobiodiversity. And one way is, and you just say it 2 times, you said to produce quality. Mm-hmm. So I have a question. So what is quality? And maybe and maybe that could be the term that we can use with politics. And if we told them, okay, this is a way to produce a more qualitative, with more quality food, maybe we can be heard better. Mm-hmm. So what is your think? Yeah. What do you think about that?
You. I mean, I think that's so interesting. I'm pretty sure that in maybe the social sciences in general, and especially anthropology, we might have several thousand pages on quality and quality and value right now. I just wrote a book review a little while ago on one of those, and it's a really important area. And I think that, again, my just like immediate response would be to try to unpack what quality and value meant in the context of that focus group when that person brought it up. I'd be really, it makes me want to go back and look at like what the discussion was before that comment and after that comment, and what was the context that led to that kind of approach. And if that person by chance referred to something specifically or explicitly about value, or maybe just trying to infer that, I think that's a really interesting idea to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl.
Thanks, Carl. So that's it for question time. We have a coffee break. We're running about 15 minutes behind, but we'll still take about 15 minutes for coffee. And then we'll come back for a series of commentaries by Carol's colleagues. So 15 minutes, which is, time is it? 4:15, right back here.
We say in French, DADA is agrobiodiversity, migrations, biocultural resilience, and adaptation. And how does this work? No. Huh? No, it's not. Okay, normally it should be like this. Okay, so first of all, I would like to recall when I met Carl in Montpellier in 2019. It was a wonderful opportunity because we really met at the Harlan International Symposium in Montpellier, in a great campus, which is the Sub-Agro campus. And I was really, amazed and interested to discuss with him. And he gave me his book, and I was so happy about that. And I knew, of course, as many scholars in Montpellier, about Carl's work. We had all cited his work, so I thought this is the grand Carl Zimmerer. And even in the end, we had a chat which was so nice about olive and El Andalus, and we spent a long time discussing about this, his interest between Andalus and Peru, and my own interest in Northern Africa. And so I just showed this highly integrative concept of Carl, which is in this book, which I think is one of the clearest sort of integrative vision of the different, you could say, themes that we cover in agrobiodiversity today. And I do think that at CEF, for instance, we are quite good at the ecology and evolution biological values, but also we cover quite a few of these. But during your stay, it has been quite an eye-opening moment with discussions that have been floating around. And so I really appreciate to be here today. And so the Mediterranean basin, and I mean, there's nothing new about it. So I'm just trying to show you a kind of a history which fundamentally is not totally different from the beginning up till now, but it's just the intensity of the plantationocene, which radically changes with time. It's just that if you look at domestication, for instance, it has been a long story, in fact, of exchanges, of shocks, of colonizations in all directions. And the basic, in fact, diversity of olive, for instance, which is shown in the above maps, with the three main olive genetic resources of the Mediterranean have been mixed up a long time with a lot of interconnections that remain for a very long time between human and biodiversity in the region, thanks to local knowledge, but also to trade since the very beginning of domestication. In fact, it's not an issue of subsistence, it's an issue of trade and of human mobility and of exchange. So it's quite important, because this idea of subsistence and high diversity is not always true. In the case of the Mediterranean, it is related to exchange and trade. And the Mediterranean is a hotspot of biodiversity. And this is also related to human and nature relationships. It is also a hotspot of food systems. And I do think that the Mediterranean diet is not one diet, but multiplicity of myriads of recipes with variations throughout the region. And on the right is just that I wanted to show that our interest and Carl's interest in recipes is very interesting, because people produce diversity out of sometimes only one thing, which is, in that case, only one olive cultivar, which is transformed, differentiated into multiple forms and formats. And this is cultural diversity. So I just wanted to show also something which comes from very far, which has been lent to me by Laurent Bouby, who is a specialist of viniculture across history, prehistory in the Mediterranean region, just to show that the production of wine has probably driven the domestication of grapevine. And he dates the domestication, the utilization of wine 6,000 years BC, when the cultivation itself occurs about 3,000 years later. And it's very interesting, and I show this picture because this is among the things that I love most, is this coexistence in the Mediterranean region until even the Roman period of the wild and the cultivated together. And this is a very interesting aspect of local knowledge. And even in the later Roman periods, in the Narbonnaise, which is very close to here, the mix of the grapevines which are found are both wild and cultivated, although it was already an intensive highly cultivated period of specialized productions of wine. So there is this issue between the products and the agrodiversity, which is at the base of it, and much more complex are the other ingredients. And in that case, fermentation is a very, very complex issue of domestication as well. Carl is interested about shocks, and I thought I should just touch upon the Greco-Roman colonization, which was preceded by the Punic ones. And these people have been intensively trading wine and oil, cereals, and slaves. So getting back to anthropology, we could say that this intensification and relationship to plantation is a mirror also of how people have been treating the other people. As monoculture develops, also the treatment of others changes, and it has implied slaves, and we already know about this story. There's nothing to say much more, but it's important to see that the colonization was also an extractive approach of other products. But it was also an emergence of cities, and because of that, because of the city of Marsilia, which is Marseille, we could say the production of wine became something which is very important in the Mediterranean region. So we often discuss with Carl, and I often tell him tree reproduction, or the way people reproduce their seeds, how they reproduce their seeds is a major issue. And so I tried to put that in my talk because, well, this is something which changed with the Roman period, is that they started the nurseries. The Greco-Romans started nurseries, whereas in fact the people were reproducing their trees themselves. So the oldest, you could say, inscription that we have in Tunisia of the Roman period shows very clearly that there are specific taxes which are applied on the plants which are planted from nurseries, which are homogenized seedlings for plantations in large scales from the grafted trees of the autochthonous people, the indigenous people of Tunisia, and that they had two different tax systems. So this was very, very, very clear, and there are very few texts which we are able to access today on this. And that this approach to plantation also differentiated something which is, on one hand, the ager, the hortus, and the silva, which is a dismantling already of the agro-silvo-pastoral integrated system of the Mediterranean region, which is throughout a very important one, with different taxes and different ways of controlling these systems. This period also corresponded to a period where the transformation for products were made in collective mills, almost an industrial period. So undoubtedly the Greco-Roman period was and has been the first path in the Mediterranean to the plantation. I have difficulties to say this word. So now I'm jumping very quickly into the present day in the Rif region in northern Morocco, where I've been working for a very long period. And just to say that in the Rif, we still have pockets of plantation of trees which correspond very exactly to what we think could have been a very ancient system of grafting trees on oleasters, which is the wild olive trees from the forest. The forests are cleared and people, they graft the trees. And these systems are extremely rich because they are co-planted as it should have been. throughout the Mediterranean region for a long time with the agro-diversity of cereals and legumes and all these small plants which are essential for people's diet. And so I'll come back to these pockets which still prevail in the north of Morocco, because this is part of the resilient system, which I'll discuss later. So Morocco and Spain was the beginning of our story together, and the Arab-Berber link is something which it's important to discuss, because these different waves of colonization, in fact, are not only negative, but also very positive. And now I'm talking about the very first Arab migrations into the Rif region, which is called the pre-Hillelian Arab migration. I was happy to work with a large group of linguists who are able to differentiate this Arabic from the 12th century Arabic of people coming from the south. And what is very interesting is that the collision between the Berber and the Arabs is producing, the frontiers between these two cultures. And we are not giving precise results in 10 minutes, but this is the beginning of technical enrichment and agro-diversity enrichment as well, which is absolutely fantastic. And the Rif remains for Morocco one of the biggest hotspots of agro-biodiversity. So it's just to say that these different shocks, with time, we need a long time also to be able to analyze what has happened afterwards. And unfortunately today, what we can see in these areas of connections is the loss of the linguistics, the loss of the names, the loss of the recipes, and people going to out migration, which is the usual system. I wanted to show also the second Arab-Berber wave, which comes from the south, which is the Al-Andalus period, the medieval period. And the fact that in Marrakesh, you have this wonderful garden, which is called the Menara Garden, which is an old Almoravid dynasty castle, you could say, with its watery system. And the area is full of a monoculture, absolute monoculture of olive. And so what is interesting is that some of my colleagues have been looking at the genetics of this, and 78% of these olive gardens are already one olive cultivar. So they had, and there have been many studies which show that this has persisted for a long time. Okay, thank you very much. So just going into the French protectorate to present, the Plantationocene period will intensify very strongly with the influence of modernization with the INRA and the propagating of large-scale olive plants, especially of the Spicheline marocaine, which besides was a name given by the French, a commercial name, and distributed free to farmers almost monovarietal olive plantations across all the country. And after independence, well, the king, there was no reason, perpetuates this approach. Now, I'm getting to the famous Plan Maroc Vert, which started in 2008 in Morocco, which intensifies the monoculture approach with an approach with aggregation of small farms upon contracts, linked to larger agro-industrial enterprises with a minimum of 100 hectares, obligation of irrigation and chemical inputs, modern oil cooperatives, which are grouped among farmers, and products which are mainly meant for export. This is the main scheme today for olive, for wheat, for major major products in Morocco. So my main idea today, just to finish this talk, is that the resilience within all this situation of an overwhelming plantation, okay, these pockets of agro-diversity and knowledge, is this like a Noah Ark paradigm of high agro-biodiversity in mountainous areas of no interest to Plan Maroc Vert, which could deploy new value chains ideas as repositories of genetic resources and knowledge systems. Resilience too derives from the cultural basis of the way Moroccans represent themselves, all products and all practices in agriculture in Morocco, which is a divide between Beldi, which is local, small, tasty, no chemicals, and the Rumi, which is foreign, big, not tasty, and industrial. This is highly, highly important in Morocco. And fortunately, we worked in the almond region with Del Planck, one of my students, who found that after the projects are over, people reshape completely the plantations. They reshape completely, and they don't mind about the genes because all of this will mix up and in fine improve the genetic base, in fact. Because so what they care for is the practices, the taste, the way it grows, and the fact that the goats and the sheep are not in jail because to protect the plantations. The resilience number 3, strangely enough, is something which I would call mobility and out-migration, and the strong linkages that people establish between those who are in Europe and the villages where they stay, which in fact also improves to some extent the situation of farmers who stay in the villages. And the fact that those who stay in the villages also resiliently continue to apply a multiple valuation approach on agro-biodiversity. And Marie-Louise is not here, but in her thesis, it's one of the aspects which she develops quite importantly. Thank you very much.
Another episode of perfect timing.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. So I forgot to mention earlier on that we'll have questions, but at the end of the set of commentaries, we'll have quite a bit of time for discussion. Great, thanks. Whoops. Next speaker. So our next presentation is by Christian Leclerc, Crop Diversity, Farmers' Practices and Resilience. Christian is a principal researcher in the Genetic Improvement and Adaptation of Mediterranean and Tropical Plants Institute, AGAP, and the Center for International Research and Development, CIRAD, where we have many friends. Christian.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hi, Carl. I'm very happy. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here with you. So as you said, Kent, I'm a social anthropologist. I'm working with population biologists, population geneticists, and I'm the head of a team that is dynamic of diversity, societies, and environments. If I introduce me like that, is just because when I met Carl, as we introduce ourselves and to introduce our relations, you are always interested by the fact that we using DNA crop molecular marker to measure the diversity of crop population, but also as related to the social differentiation of farmer communities. And then this is the question you ask about the ingredient. As we do that with the crop, we could do that on ingredient also, and studying ingredient as we did with DNA markers, what we did.
Voilà.
Thank you. Voilà. We start learning French also, I have to say. Sometimes nous parlons un peu français. À bientôt.
Oui, oui.
À bientôt. Thank you. And I just introduced myself. Thank you, Carl, for the time we spent together in the data analysis. It was very interesting just to learn how we ask questions and how we are working, each of us, and how we have working together to do that. It was very interesting. Thank you. I hope that my comment will help you shed the light on your data interpretation, maybe new question, and I will come back on the question of the resilience, farmer practices, and the crop diversity. Of course, we do not formulate comment about the skill we do not have. I'm saying food and nutrition. We do not work enough on food and nutrition, and I'm saying that this question, this object is very interesting and very innovative, and I don't have any skill to formulate any comment about food and nutrition. So I would like to shed the light on some studies my colleague did. The first one is the one concerning the banana story. And I used the locating the social process in crop evolution. This is the Stephen Bruce title of the Ireland tree presentation. And then I was liking this title, and the history of in the domestication of the banana is very interesting because it's clearly for me an interdisciplinary approach that use historical comparative linguistic, that use archaeological data and use crop population genetic data to make the story of both the society who move around the Indian Ocean and the crop that move with people. And they use the word to reconstruct the path that the people use to come from the East Asia to go to East Africa, using linguistic comparative, historical linguistic comparative. And then it was very great to see this study from Xavier Perrier in our team, DDSE. And the next example that is related to migration and your topic also is the one on right. It's the intercontinental connection of Eastern Africa with the worldwide. And the idea was from the historian that write this project. And the problem was for them that the intercontinental exchange and interconnectivity of Africa was under-evaluated by in the history of Africa. It colonialism vision of what was the history of Africa make the Africa as an isolated continent. And we use the crop as historical and social markers, as you see, to analyze the intercontinental connection. And you see the inward connection on the top, the crop, where the crop are from. And they are used around the Victoria Lake. We use a very small area to make the inventory. We use 75 crops as historical markers in order to show what was historically the interconnection of Africa with other continents. And in the outward connection is the African crop that have been that move from Africa to other continent also. And the other key studies is the one of Vanessa Labiri that we implemented in the linguistic contact zone with Taraka, Chuka, and Bere. And these people are maintaining over generation the linguistic differentiation. And the question was, what is the anthropological process that it has worked to explain that people from one generation to another one keep the linguistic differentiation? And our hypothesis was that the marriage network is working more within community than between. It means that the inheritage of the language itself is within community than more more within than between. And we extend this social hypothesis to the seeds and the seed exchange system, hypothesizing that the seed exchange system is probably follow the marriage network. And then it's probably more within than between community also. If that is true, we use the molecular marker to see if at the molecular level, the picture of the DNA marker is not random between this community, meaning that the neutral marker, as you maybe know, is migration markers. And if the migration is random, markers will be everywhere. If they are not random, it will be more within than between. It means that we will see the genetic differentiation of population according to the social or to the linguistic differentiation of farmer. It was the case. And we published this work with Vanessa in the 2014 and 2016. And it was clearly a social factor that is at work in structuring crop genetic diversity. And on right, we have another component of the crop diversity, which is a political component, could be also juridical component, and referring to the regulatory framework, international usually, but is adopted in West Africa, for example, that is promoting only a very specific solution, that is a commercial solution, that is improved variety, that is an economic model, and only this one. And we categorize other practices as informal. And we have a problem, as we have one model, economic model, and one juridical model that follow one political model to answer to the diversity of problems that the West African farmer have to face too. And this is the project that was managed by Selim, that is, he will talk just after me. And then we developed the project, and I take just a few time on this problem, because the binary division of what farmer practices could be was summarized as a formal one, as opposed to an informal one. And the aim of the project was to evaluate the diversity of the practices that's in between. And it's not true that we can divide the world and divide the diversity of practices as someone are formal and someone are informal, as the informal practices are formally, culturally, socially transmitted and can be described as many solutions for the future to face to climate change. But little attention has been paid to the diversity of farmer practices, and this is the point I would like to talk today, to make a comment following your presentation calls. Crop diversity farmer practices, I use the singular farmer practices, and resilience, I use the singular because I would like to I don't want to talk about the singular practices. Is resilient based on farmer practices and individual choice, as we believe? Do we have to increase the ability for individuals to adopt the good and the better strategy, or a collective action? This is my question. Is resilience a collective matter? We implement a collaborative project and define a protocol with partner in for a survey in 4 countries, from Niger to Senegal, in Ouagadougou, and then we expect the aim for a common protocol, a training, a focus group, individual interview. We debrief after the training, and we define what was the protocol for each team. It includes farmer organization and research organization all together to implement this survey simultaneously in the 4 countries. And we define the protocol together. It was based on, we take into consideration 30 crop species, and we implement this survey in 144 villages, and considering about 285 farmers, using Kobo tools data collection and data sharing, because all the survey that was implemented in one country was visible by the other team that was working in the other country, as they share the same network connection to share the data while they are implementing the survey itself. This is the point. The mean distance between each one is about 70 kilometers because it's a uniform spatial sampling strategy. It means that we don't take care about what is the factor at work. We take the spatial distribution as a strategy to see if there is the factor at work. It could be the urbanization, could be if we are close to the city, is the diversity higher or lower? It could be when we close to the Sahel area and the rainfall is not the same. Is it a key factor? And so on. And it was what we did. And it's all of that is done to do spatial modeling to understand what will be. Is it political factor as agricultural policy, for example? For each country that is at work to explain differentiation between population. This is some result that I will not detail, but we have okra that we see that it could be cultivated by many people, is in blue, or many people, in blue it's many people in large area. We have the 4 categories on the right down corner. Many people, small area, few people, large area, or few people, small area. And all these 3 colors or 4 categories to see what is the diversity of pattern we have. Okra is one pattern, sorghum is another one, maize is another one, and cowpea is another one. There is no one pattern, there are many. And the problem we have is to take into account the complexity. As we don't have one model, we have many strategies, and we don't know how to deal with, because with the solution that could be the best in Dakar could be not the best in Niamey. And we don't have we don't know. Do you see the summary statistic, the graph you see summarize the variability of practices we are talking about. Okay, I would like to use a common graph that help us asking the great question. This graph is the cumulative curve, the red one, and the black one is the mean number of species that farmer is cultivating. If we use, I don't know if you see my arrow, isn't it? Yeah. If we use the 10 farmer, they are close, but the mean number of variety in the group of 10 farmers is 10. But we have altogether the richness is 11. We have 11 species. And if we add one farmer, if we add one farmer and we have 11, 12, and the richness increase because we find new crop that have never been cultivated by the farmer before, and so on and so on. And we can know how many farmers we need to have the diversity we expect to find in the area. But what we see is that the mean number of crop cultivated by an individual farmers is about 9.8 species, as you see, from 10 to 300. But the cumulative curve is up to 30 because it's the maximum of crop we take into consideration. But the question is resilience a collective matter, as crop diversity is a collective matter? It seems that there is a variability between farmers. If there is no variability, we should add the same curve for the cumulative curve as we have for the individual statistic for farmer. Is matter of if resilience collective matter, we have the correlation that we could see, the correlation between the number of species and the latitude. The latitude in West Africa have nothing to do with individual choice, except if we believe that the choice of the farmer that live close to the Sahel are making some choice, while the farmers that are living in the south area are making other choice or other strategy. We cannot believe that. There is no individual choice or strategy in this result. We have other results that suggest that there is a collective fact. The number of species is related to the number of language that we are speaking in the village. As we are speaking many languages, probably food preferences are different, and we are cultivating many species more than if we are speaking only one language. This factor has nothing to do with individual factor because we are not choosing the language we are speaking or the village where we are living. We have another problem with individual practices and individual choice. The third is the years since the village were established, we see that the number of crop is higher for the older village over 100 years. This has nothing to do with individual choice. And the fourth is the quality of member of farmer organization. The green one is our individual that are member of farmer organization, and the red one, the one that are not member of farmer organization. As you see, the richness, the crop diversity is higher for farmer that are member of farmers organization. Probably because we exchange more within association or within organization, and I'm not sure that this is an individual choice, but a collective action. The research itself was a collective action. And this is my point today. We make a workshop in Montpellier to ask to people what is the answer to the question we're asking together. It was but not our question, it was their question as we defined the protocol with them. But the second workshop was how do we do the interpretation of the results, but what will be the question? And we ask them to formulate the question that, according to you, they will be interesting to make analyze on, and what we did. And they formulate about 35 priority questions, though it's only part of the result I present to you. We did data analyze before the workshop to answer to this question. And for each question, we ask to people to see if the question is questionable, why this result is questionable. Is it comforting or related to other known fact, the fact we know, and which is the message of the result, and how to make the result more explicit. We are writing a paper together, you see. It's a collective thinking, collective action. We believe that it's fostering the resilience as it's increased the efficiency, I believe, or what the question you ask, if we have to change something, what is the transformative value of the research process itself when we are getting data or making interpretation on data? My conclusion, if the diversity of farmer practices are adapted to a diversity of context, this is the hypothesis of Selim, this could help us, and I believe what you said, Selim, this could help us imagine not a single, but a diversity of solution. But we have the solution. The farmers have the solution because they are living in many different contexts. We need more analysis to see the effect of urbanization or market accessibility. We could do that with this data. How resilience is a collective matter remain on the untapped area. We have to understand what is farmer practices. Is it individual? Is it collective? How is it collective? Etc. To understand what is the social mechanism on which we could mobilize the farmer themselves to increase the resilience or their system. If the research project themselves are conceived as a collective action, as it was the case, I believe that they could foster the farmer community resilience as we increase the awareness of diversity with the farmer organization together with research organization. Thank you very much. Excuse me. Is from Marcela Santos, who is Alexander von Humboldt Biological Resources and Research Institute and Colectivo Biodiversity in Colombia, and the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department at Tulane University, who's joining us virtually to give a talk, a larger view of agrobiodiversity, animal pollination, and linkages among forests, agriculture, people, and food. Marcela, thank you.
Thank you so much for this invitation. First, please let me know if you are seeing my screen and the video.
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Amazing. So it's a pleasure to be with you. And thanks, Carl, for the invitation to this celebration of your work. I think I first met you through your work 10 years ago when I was just starting this transition from a background in animal behavior and biology to learn about social sciences, geography, and things happening in my region in Latin America and in Colombia. So I read Changing Fortunes, your work in Peru, and other contributions. And then I had the chance to meet you in 2019 as part of a Sync pursuit with other amazing friends to better understand how agrobiodiversity nourishes us. And now I would like to share a larger view of agrobiodiversity through the lenses of animal pollination. So about 85% of flowering plant species closely relate with animals that transport pollen and facilitate the production of seeds and fruit for other animals perpetuating forests, and about 1/3 of the crops consumed by naked animals, us. Bees, the most famous pollinator, are now managed to pollinate crops for human consumption, but these bees are not compatible with the flowers of many crops. To the bottom, we see different crops and that the pollination offered by the honeybee in green dots is lower than the pollination offered by wild insects here in pink dots. And these wild insects are found mainly in forests and complex habitats, and force us to think about the linkages between forest, agriculture, people, and food. And in this presentation, I want to go through those linkages by sharing some work conducted in Colombia, in which I explored how people benefit from animal pollination through food production and consumption, how were local and landscape habitat factors shaped by agricultural production and how they influence biodiversity. And I would like to finish by discussing how to promote pollinators in tropical agricultural lands. So let's think about Colombia, the second most biodiverse country on Earth, and Anolaima, a small town located on the eastern flank of the Andes Mountains that used to produce high volumes of coffee and many tropical fruits, but plant agrobiodiversity and crop productivity and profitability have declined in the last decades after different waves of agricultural intensification and enhanced socioeconomic inequality that influences land uses. So here, as in many other regions of the world, few people own large farms in which they grow commercial monocrops managed with synthetic inputs, and they also maintain pastures for cattle ranching. And most people access farms with 2 hectares or less and maintain coffee agroforests and a high diversity of crops for their consumption and commercialization. They cannot afford using pesticides. And in those settings, I wanted to understand whether and how people were accessing the benefits of animal pollination. So we conducted surveys to know the foods that people were producing and consuming, and we crossed that with literature on the contribution of animal pollination to those crops. Broadly, we found that households were growing at least 42 edible plant species, some of them in different varieties, and that 68% of these crops were benefited from animal pollination, here highlighted in orange. The most popular commercial crop was coffee, pollinated by bees, and that was managed in agroforests without chemical inputs. But other popular crops pollinated by bees, like tomato or passion fruits, were intensively managed, including high loads of pesticides like furadan, toxic for the people, toxic for the bees. At the national level, we are exploring now that the scenario is very similar. Towards the left, we see in yellow lines that about 69% of all commercial crop species grown in Anolaima are animal pollinated crops, cultivated in 70% of crop land, that towards the right is concentrated in green areas in this map that are focused on the Andean and Caribbean regions, where people mainly grow coffee, palm oil, and cocoa, which are animal pollinated crops. These are exported, and as seen towards the left, export quantities have not increased, again in yellow lines, but to the right, we see that the values for those crops have largely increased in the last decade, which is a global trend. And that trend is encouraging people to grow more of those crops through agricultural intensification and the expansion of the agricultural frontier. And now those crops are deforestation-risk commodities, and other emergent crops like avocado have been associated with massive bee deaths in Colombia. These crops and other tropical crops are exported to affluent countries in which people are increasing their dietary diversity and their demand for highly nutritious foods. But are people in producing regions also eating highly nutritious foods benefited by animal pollinators? We asked, and the broad answer is no. Similar to what Carl was mentioning, people are mainly basing their diets on purchased foods, here in green boxes. And towards the left, we have that people mainly ate foods not benefited by animal pollination. However, as people purchased more foods, diets included foods pollinated by animals, many of which were grown in Anolaima in the past. And we also found that people in general in larger households and smaller farms were accessing foods benefited from animal pollination only when they grew them, because otherwise could not afford them, which is concerning if we consider that animal pollinated crops contribute with about 40% of the supply of essential micronutrients, including vitamin A, folate, and iron, whose absence is known as hidden hunger and can limit human development. And this is a massive issue in terms of public health right now. And in Colombia, deficiencies in vitamin A towards the left in red and iron towards the right are prevalent. So a reduced access to pollinator-dependent micronutrient production could make them worse. And this happens in the paradoxical context in which global malnutrition overlaps with pollinator-dependent micronutrient production. So from this, we can say that agriculture in Anolaima and Colombia involves about 2/3 of animal pollinated crops, including export crops like coffee, cacao, avocado, and passion fruits, but that despite growing these and many other animal pollinated crops, people, at least in Anolaima, are not benefiting from pollination through food consumption. And that reductions in the local availability of animal pollinated crops due to pollinator declines or the displacement of staple animal pollinated crops to grow export crops may negatively impact the nutritional security of marginalized communities relying on local circuits to access nutritious foods. But we also wanted to know how these patterns of crop production were shaping local and landscape habitat factors influencing pollinators like the bees. So first, consider that wild pollinators, nest and find food in forests, visiting trees with open flowers throughout the year in areas within their flying capacity. But forests have been largely transformed, and in the Colombian Andes, they have been extensively replaced with coffee crops that may be in total bloom for 2 or 3 days of the year, but in 362 days, they act as a green desert in which people have to manage these crops with agrochemicals, many times toxic for the bees, to supplant for the ecological functions that are no longer present. And when we think about this aggregated at the landscape scale, and crops interspersed with forests, pastures, eroded soils, and other land covers, we can imagine that the connectivity of forests in the landscapes with crops offering resources for the bees will enable the movement of pollinators, for example, from forests in which they nest to those crop fields that need to be pollinated to yield fruit for humans. So we wanted to know how those local and landscape factors were influencing bees in Nolaima, and whether those factors interacted with gradients like elevation that influences the physiology of bees and modulates their responses to environmental change. So again, and for this, we surveyed bees in 17 farms with heterogeneous land uses and that were surrounded by different amounts of complex habitats towards the right in dark green. Broadly, we found 57 bee genera, and we found that the naturalized and Africanized honeybee Apis mellifera, as well as Trigona amaltea, native bees, were hyperabundant, that these two bees are highly defensive and have many conflicts with humans who try to eradicate them. We also found native social stingless bees as present in different crops, that semi-social and solitary native bees were rare in general. Bee abundance was best predicted and was negatively influenced by agrochemical management, and it increased with high elevation. Bee abundance also increased in areas with more flowers and in areas in which landscapes had more unshaded crop covers. And this was mainly driven by Apis honeybees, who dominated mass flowering crops concentrated in the highlands, where there is more water and then more monocrops irrigated by that water, and where few other bees were present. In general, we also found that there were more bee species and also more evenly distributed towards the lowlands and in landscapes with more complex cover, which were agroforests and diversified food gardens, in which semi-social and solitary bees were highly present. And when we compared, local factors were more important than landscape factors to explain patterns of bee diversity. And so from this, we can say that habitat complexity represented in forests, agroforests, diversified farms was encouraging bee diversity. We can say that bees in Nolaima are highly sensitive to habitat factors at the local scale, and that habitat simplification is driving processes of bee biotic homogenization, especially in landscapes concentrating agro-industrial fields. And when we put this together with what I shared before, we broadly can say that the comparative advantage of tropical regions largely involves producing highly nutritious foods benefiting from animal pollination, but international trade, socioeconomic inequality, and other historical trajectories have created conditions driving habitat simplification and intensification that threatens the pollinators upon which agriculture relies. And hence, that represents a negative feedback for the production of high-value animal pollinated crops. And we can also say that potential pollinator declines or the displacement of animal pollinated crops for domestic consumption towards export crops can decrease the local availability of animal pollinated crops for marginalized communities that depend on the local production to access highly nutritious foods. So this in general is also telling us that we need to encourage pollinators for the sustainability of food production in the tropics and their fair trade with affluent nations in the global north. And so how to do that, and with this I would like to finish, we need to first restore and repair relationships with pollinators by increasing our awareness of our interdependence with them, learning more about who they are and the conditions that enable their persistence. And we need to create worlds in which they are actively included. And as we learn about them, for example, about the different foods that depend on animal pollinators for our consumption, we can prioritize the production and our consumption of agroecological and organic versions of those crops to encourage their production free of agrochemicals. And we also need to repair and restore spaces in which pollinators can nest, find food, and thrive, which means filling the world with flowers. Insects largely respond to local habitat factors, so our fruit gardens in urban spaces can be great contributors, also in other spaces, but we obviously need to go beyond and promote the reparation and transformation of food systems and socio-ecological relationships involved, with some very concrete material changes, such as the urgent reduction in pesticide use and reductions in deforestation, but also a reconfiguration of relationships in the food system, in which we give more value to the hard work conducted by smallholders, many times women, already producing healthy and nutritious foods in healthy agroecosystems. And we can do that by obtaining our food through food circuits in which those products are available and in which food is valued beyond its price. And we finally need to both actively for life and leaders that promote intersectoral approaches between the environmental, agricultural, health, and economic segments of governments, and that coordinate and promote policies and actions leading to concrete transformations in our food systems, and hopefully transnational approaches such as the European Union regulation on deforestation to prevent products and commodities linked to deforestation and forest degradation in other places of the world. And with that, I finish. And I'm sorry I took an extra minute. And I thank to the V's, to all the people with whom I worked, and all the different funders of my work. Thanks for listening.
Get extra applause for coming in under time, Marcelo. Thank you. And please stay online so you can join us in the discussion period afterward. That would be great. Whoops, shut off my timer. There we go. So our final commentator today is Salim Louafi, Deputy Director for Research and Strategy, the French Center for International Research and Development, Ciudad de Montpellier, with a talk important issues and ideas on the science policy interface.
Excellent. So I will try to keep it short. That's the end of the day. And yes, and it will be even easier for me that I'm sorry for that, because I didn't have a lot of time to prepare this presentation. So actually, I will mainly really comment. I have not prepared slides, so and it will be like 3 separate line of thoughts that I will try to connect to each other to put my main arguments about actually the role and responsibility of science in trying to influence the transition towards sustainability that are those transitions that are needed towards sustainability. So first, regarding your presentation, Carl, I think your work really contribute to build new disciplinary linkages, to initiate new research questions, to build new hypotheses. And we also saw that it has the potential to, it has also potentially great policy implication. And that was already discussed, and you've answered to that. But we know also that building a new narrative that connects biodiversity, food, and nutrition along the line that of your work, and as all this seminar did, even build on strong evidence, is definitely not enough, actually, and not a guarantee in itself to trigger the policy change that are required. So how to effectively influence the transitions towards the change that are at the core of your work and your concern? That's question, again, came several times, and that's something that I've reflect upon in my work. And it's even all the more striking that we have never produced so much information about biodiversity loss, and that has so little impact on the policy decision, right? So, and that lead us to wonder whether the problem is really related to a knowledge deficit, or perhaps it's not the right knowledge or the knowledge needed to act and to make decisions that are produced. So, and I'll get back to that. I'll park this question to open my second line of thoughts, and I'll get back to that at the end. So my second line is on the global level, on those global discussion about biodiversity. So I'm sure you were also in Montreal at the COP15, right? And probably some of you. So you know that we've adopted a new global biodiversity framework that is quite ambitious and that is built upon the failure of the Aichi targets that have a kind of which was a kind of wishful list of objectives that didn't trigger any real changes. And we have now a list of objectives which are much more practical, but that we know also, and that has been commented, that are not really addressing those systemic changes that are needed. They do not explicitly highlight the need for structural changes in relation to the major trends that are in place in many territories. And more especially, more specifically, the link with food system has not been made explicit at all, despite and that despite the fact that we have also some good new at least targets that make the link with agroecology, with pesticide use. So there are very good advances, but we know that it's still not completely sufficient. Yet, I think what is also very interesting for this time compared to the Aichi target, and that is included in those targets 14 to 23, it's the emphasis on the transformative and the decentralized logic in terms of the sectors, the actors, the procedural elements, and the implementation mechanism that are displayed in those targets 14 to 23, which is precisely what was missing in the Aichi target, something related to actors, sectors, institutions. And among those actors and institutions, science as a social actor is one of those, which is particularly challenged to provide the kind of also transformative change that are needed to accompany those the transition for fighting against biodiversity erosion. So, and that comes to my third point, which is really about the science policy interface. And when we, which is basically the try to combine those two things. When we hear about this interface between science and decision making or policy, it often refers actually to three kind of cliches that really are hard to get rid of. The first one is the primacy of politics, where politicians are asking research questions to science, and they make decisions based on those. And they have basically the first and the last word. The second cliche, it's the exact opposite, and this is much more, let's say, familiar in the scientific world. It's to say that science has to speak truth to power, and it's basically based on the quality of the science that provides facts, that provide evidence, that provides information that the politic will decide in a much more informed way, take more informed decision. And if they don't, basically it's a problem of political will. And that's the end of the story. And the third cliche is a more cynical one, and that's basically this vision of politics and science as belonging to the cynical one is this idea that scientists use politics to get more visibility, more budget, and more kind of for their own kind of research interest or for their career. And on the contrary, the politician or politics use scientists to package decisions that are already made in advance, basically. So that's really the cynical kind of view. And that's also in the general audience, something that we usually find. So the problem with all those cliches that they don't really, they look at science and politics and policy, are two complete different worlds that where politics is there to decide and science is there just to produce knowledge. And as if we don't have a production of knowledge in the process of political decision, and that there is no register of production of truth in politics that that exists also in its own way, which is different from the register of truth in science. Anyway, so really the idea is to look at those kind of intermediate zone between science and policy and see that as much more fluid, dynamic relation in which the truth is built in the confrontation of ideas and the deliberation and in which the truth is always temporary because there are always new evidence, new data, new information, and that we always have to interact constantly with policymakers to advance, in this kind of middle zone of science policy interface. So, and that's exactly what this interface is about. Is really trying to manage this tension between, as a kind of very unstable equilibrium between science and policy, and then in that case, the policy is not seen as simply a struggle for pushing its own ideas, but really as a forum for debating with a community of different kind of actors to find acceptable solution to common problems that we have. So and again, in our way usually of as a scientist in thinking how we can have more impact on policy is to put more science in policy. Basically, provide more data, more information, more science in policy making. And I think I would argue the exact opposite, actually, that we need to put more policy in science. And what does it mean to put more policy in science? It means first, and that's the basic response, the first one, immediate, let's have more political scientists. That's the disciplinary response, right? And that's obviously, we know, not enough. But that we hear that a lot. Yes, it's true. We don't have a clear understanding of the policy dynamics, and we need to invest in and appoint more policy analysts. Obviously, we know that it's not enough. Second level, and that's, I think it's exactly what you've showed superbly, is this idea that we need a much more pluralism, epistemic pluralism, by looking at the different, with different lenses, through different lenses, the same kind of object and problem, but still within the academic world, like trying to diversify our way of approaching a problem and including in our methods to investigate these problems. So that's obviously very powerful to break some kind of monopoly that have been accumulated over time of some science towards some object. And obviously, agrobiodiversity, you have this monopoly of geneticists mainly who have the truth power in our science institution to say what is important and how to look at, how to approach agrobiodiversity as mainly a stock of alleles that need to be explored and valorized in to produce more. Basically, I'm making very, I'm being very schematic here, but and you have the same kind of monopoly of ecologist or ecologue, I don't know, ecologist on biodiversity, ignoring the whole cultural dimension of biodiversity, which is obviously taken into account, but more as a commentary of the truth that is given by ecologists about biodiversity, and not really as a core knowledge that, so this fight between discipline is very important to conduct, and making linkages as you did is really important. But but beyond the epistemic, let's say, pluralism, we need also social a diversity of social value in the conduct of knowledge production, and that is the transdisciplinarity and this idea of involving more stakeholders in our process of knowledge building, and with the way that's how basically we will be able to provide to break the linear division between production and use, between knowledge and practices, and that posture make it possible also to open up the aspect of pluralism not as a prerequisite but as a consequence of the research design that is in place. It's because you have that diversity of social value associated to the problem that you are trying to analyze and to provide solutions about, that you will basically not just address the conflict of values and the normative aims as the epistemic pluralism allow you to do, but also allow to people to make use of the knowledge that is generated for their own objective and own kind of daily life. And again, that really breaks the logic between production and use of knowledge. And then finally, the fourth, I would say, level is that if we go for this kind of approach of engaging with stakeholder, that is not given because we have rules in our institutions that define the condition under which we will engage with those stakeholders, and who are not professional and they are not researcher as such, right? So how and the way we engage with them, that's also a very political aspect, and that's force us to look at the political dimension in scientific practices and question the rules that govern the collective dimension of knowledge production. So, and that's honestly, that's probably the most difficult part in our institution to change, because we are tending to function as a kind of hegemonic power in those kind of, because we know how to produce knowledge. That's our work. And we tend to neglect that the way people feel about the rules that govern the way they will contribute with you in the knowledge production system has an impact on the way it will be eventually used to change the practices that are needed. So again, and that's why that's where the legitimate, yeah, I'm done basically. So so you see, it's really about the credibility, the relevance, the social relevance of what you build, but also the legitimacy under which you build this knowledge. That and it's the combination of the three, and that's a very hard task. But that's probably the task of our institution for the next century, is really to try to combine those three things together to be able to really trigger the change that we need in terms of transition and having a real impact on real life. Sorry, I've been a bit probably long. So, but.
Thank you, Salim. That was actually a good way to wrap up, given the sorts of questions that we've had. But we're not wrapped up because we have a laundry time for discussion. Oh, sorry, Christian. So perhaps if everyone could gather up near the front, someone can take my chair. There we go. I'll get my computer and phone out of the way. Do we have online questions? Okay, so why don't we set the same pace again? We'll start with a couple of questions from the online audience, and then we'll come in. Give everybody a time to get a drink of water and have a seat. And we'll remember that Marcella is online with us as well. Okay, excellent.
Thank you. So we have first an invitation to Carl to meet in Lima in September. So that was just a comment from someone there, Santiago Roca. And then we have two questions from Ashgarieh Gibjan, which are quite general. First one on GMO, and I think other people in the room could be interested. Globally, there is a development of GMO, hybridization, and different technologies to increase production. How these practices are affecting biodiversity? Is it a threat or an opportunity for food and nutrition? A classic question. And another one, maybe to Marcella, are there any possibilities to use biocontrol in place of pesticides to minimize the effect on pollinators? Are biocontrols easily accessible? And we had also a fellows last year working on these issues. So.
Thanks. Who wants to begin? Carl? Oh, Christian? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I can try to answer to the first question. The question was the GMO could be an opportunity for food and nutrition, isn't it? Or a threat. Yeah, it could be the two. But my worry is about the autonomy of farmers to get seed by themselves, and the orientation of the economic system that apply the use of GMO. And we usually under-evaluate the importance of the economic orientation and the means of what is production. And the farming system is not always to make profit and not always to overproduce, to sell a part, to get money, to buy seeds. You see the system that it was the one we test, and the one for which we know and we see the limit today as the very extraordinary presentation concerning the role of the pollinators. And we have to see that there is a limit somewhere. And I would suggest that GMO is part of this limit because it's associated to a specialized production system. And then we have to know what we want first. And the question is the value of our collective life we would like to put our face on, and what do you want? And we could find very clear answer to this question if we take into consideration the value on which we base our future.
You will answer to that. Well, I can make one comment. I think there are enough experiences of situations where farmers having to deal with GMO can be, completely devastated by the fact that they don't recognize their crops, the fact that they have no control over the reproduction, the fact that they are totally linked to a system of buying of pesticides and other, inputs generally related to GMO, and that this is a major issue that, all of us have been highlighting the fact that farmers need to know what they reproduce, the seeds, the grafting or other systems that they wish. And I agree totally with Christian that the multiple values do not fit at all with the GMO pattern. And then finally, from an evolutionary perspective, since I'm from the CEF, I think it's also a garage une voie de garage, hein? A dead end that doesn't help nature to adapt, and there's no resilience in the approach of GMO. So,
How about Salim?
Well, just to say that the classical answer when you ask this question to geneticists would be to answer by about the intrinsic quality of the GMO product, and all what has been said is exactly about moving out from this kind of it's independent of the quality of the genetic dimension, and I would say even from the risk based approach under which we have so far in our regulatory system evaluated the relevance of GMO as such. And anyway, we have here a specialist who can talk about that much better than me. So I totally agree with all what has been said, because those are the real fundamental issue where we have no real public space to discuss about that and no mechanism, regulatory mechanism to really act on those aspects on GMO. When we deal about GMO, it's really just about the genetic dimension and the quality and the risk associated to that at the genetic level. So, which is a very poor.
Brian, do you want to add? We have a specialist in the room. No. Okay, so you should go. I'm good.
Okay, Marcella, do you need the question again, or are you good?
I'm good, and I have a small comment, like a feminist comment. And if we consider like this feminist approach to everything in which we try to promote the conditions that encourage the persistence of life, we can think about what we want in those terms, for example, in the sense that life can self-perpetuate through variation, like diversity, and GMOs go in the opposite way. Like they simplify, they just promote this reduction of diversity in general, and they'll, I don't know, losing our autonomy in general. So I really liked Christian's approach in the sense of thinking what we want and trying to put the reproduction of life at the center to guide those thoughts about what we want, and think about these different technologies or these different solutions that could be a death end, and place them according to this approach. Are they promoting life in the long term or not? That would be my comment. Thank you.
Good. Thanks.
The other question.
Loads of hands. Oh, sorry.
There was this other question for Marcela on biocontrol strategy.
Right.
I will just repeat. Marcela, this person online was asking if there are any possibilities to use biocontrol strategies in place of pesticides to minimize the effect on pollinators.
Yes.
And are they easily accessible? Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And the thing is always thinking out how we do things. We can introduce foreign biological controllers as this one technical solution, but if we don't really know their ecological impact, that brings risks. So we should be super careful. But however, there's this, I don't know if to say thing, or this approach which is encouraging conservation biological control, in which what farmers can do is to promote conditions so that local, native or naturalized natural enemies of pests and diseases are encouraged in agricultural lands, and they find food by eating the pest of different crops. And so that is a great alternative. There are studies on that. I mainly know the case of coffee, but there are many other cases in which insectivorous bats are shown as very good controllers of pests, birds, insects, parasitizing other insects, and as we again promote conditions for those organisms to be present in agricultural lands, we increase complexity, we increase the autonomy, the ecological autonomy of our systems. And in the long term, we are also decreasing production costs, and we are letting the systems regulate by themselves. So the thing is that requires patience, investment, and regaining knowledge in the short term. But in the medium and long term, they can be an amazing alternative. And what I was mentioning to the person proposing the question is that there is this other thing regarding pesticides and their effects, and it is the fact that many times they are not precisely effective at fighting pests. And when you compare the effects of pesticides on yields versus the effects of losing pollinators on yields, many times the effects of pollinator gaps can be way higher. That if we don't know those trends, if we don't know the trade-offs, then we just keep using the alternative that we know. So we need to keep working on knowing those trade-offs to encourage other alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcela. Okay. So again, if you could introduce yourself and your affiliation, and if your question is for a particular panelist or everyone.
I'm Hind Sabri. I'm an anthropologist and fellow MAK'IT fellow. I would like to comment in addition to what you have mentioned for Madame. I work specifically during my thesis work on the systems of local governance of irrigation, water, and in relation to agricultural development policy in Morocco. And this is in the mountains of the Western High Atlas of Morocco, and it devoted an important part of my research to this green Moroccan plan and its adaptability or not to the local level and the complexity of micro-local specificity. So thank you for mentioning the history of the first Arab settlement in Morocco. I worked on the two Hilalian and Banu MAK'IT tribes, and the three periods of that marks the history of agriculture policy in Morocco, the period of Makhzen, the protectorate, French and the Spanish protectorate, and the state of independent Morocco. So the Moroccan state, I think, with the failure of the first public policies based on the technical choice, on the only means of economic development, and in the context of climate change, with this plan try to reconcile between the social, economic, and environmental stakes with a certain number of plans. So, but in reality, only the plains and the deer payment of part of MAK'IT, it's my work field, have benefited from the recent policy by continuing to disadvantage the mountains areas of Angal, for example, and agriculture development. So in this area of MAK'IT, always as the areas of the petite et moyenne hydraulique, small-scale irrigation, the state continues to strengthen this role at the local level by definition of 17% of agricultural investment against only 20% of the private sector. So under the PMV, the states continue to consolidate its power at the local level by moving a decision without consultation and to consultation without decision. So I have some example, but I don't have, if you have a time to have some example of my field work or not.
Maybe if you have a specific question, that would be good.
But I have a comment. Okay. I don't have yeah.
All right, fair enough.
So thank you.
Indies, would you like to comment back?
Well, I would say it's quite similar to our common agricultural policy in Europe, which has two pillars, similarly to the PMV in Morocco. And the first pillar always grabs all the money for the biggest farmers. And the second pillar, which is meant for the mountains and very small agricultural systems, generally, get almost nothing out of it except pressure, which generally tend to, push these smallholder farmers towards, rural exodus. And that's what I would say. It's the same thing which is happening in Morocco. And the PMV is a loan from the US government mainly, and Morocco will be probably paying very, very hard, back, because all the systems in the Morocco is mainly mountain. So it will be very difficult to recover after PMV, with the small farmers, but they will manage differently.
Thanks. I guess I have here.
You know Phil Donahue, Kenneth?
Yeah.
Yeah, you look like Phil Donahue, just running around with the microphone. For all those people who know Phil Donahue, they're much better, much better. My name's Brian Dowd-Uribe, and I'm also a MAK'IT fellow. And I just want to thank everyone for the just incredibly stimulating conversation today. It's been so wide ranging. I learned so much. My head's swimming in questions, and I don't want the day to end. And so in maybe honoring that or trying to process, I will try to process a question out of what I'm about to say, but it will also be a comment. So, but first I want to try to connect maybe something that Selim was saying with some of the things that you were, what I guess find so provocative and interesting about some of your work, Carl. Is what I respect so much about your work is how much you think about how to frame the present in terms that can encompass where it's going into the future, such that it doesn't lead to just a rattling your fist critique without some way of opening up space to see a plurality of entry points, but also a plurality of possible futures. And I see that you really take that seriously in your work. And I find that just great and something that I would like to embody in my own work. So thank you for doing that. And I kind of want to put that into conversation with something that Selim was talking about the science and policy interface. And I guess the simple question is, how do you see the work that you're doing in terms of how to frame and orient and your work in the terms that Selim was talking about a science policy interface and about how to engage with people in the policy realm about the importance of your work? So I was wondering whether you could comment on that, and whether that would be a stimulating avenue to think about engaging those two spaces. That's my question. Now, my comment, given that we're in France and given that we have geographers, I couldn't help but trying to think about ways to connect some of the works that we've been seeing here. And of course, it brought me to Bruno Latour and actor network theory and more than human approaches. And I was thinking about the materialities, or I found very interesting several of the materialities of some of the things that were being presented. So when I saw you present earlier, Carl, about monocultures, and you started with wheat, and then you went to sugarcane, and then you went to cotton, of all things. And I'm thinking perennial, and then that led to monocultures later on. And so I was wondering, I was seeing the formation of flowers and pollinators and the ways in which pollinators move through spaces and how they move through spaces. I was thinking about grafting and olives. I was thinking about the crops that Christian was talking about in terms of cowpea and sorghum, and how they all have particular materialities to them that then inform ways in which they produce social ecologies, and those social ecologies continue to evolve over time. And so I was wondering, I guess that's more of a comment, but I was also wondering whether those sorts of approaches or ways of thinking about some of the things that you all were discussing provide new avenues or new questions to consider and new avenues of research.
Perfect. Great. So framing and what comes next question.
Thanks so much, Brian. That's super interesting and thought provoking. And this idea of generating kind of ideas for a plurality of futures and putting that into a kind of context of science policy interfaces, I think is it's just something I'm thinking about for the first time and thinking is really important. And in some ways, I mean, the one very immediate response is that it has to do with a certain kind of division of labor in a way, division of academic labor, division of institutional labor. People who work in CIRAD have different kinds of institutional context than someone who's appointed in a university. And so to me then, and so I think that is kind of fundamental in this. I mean, and to me then, maybe the next interesting question might be something like, well, if we think about these somewhat different but maybe overlapping spaces, how do they overlap? How does someone working in some ways on this kind of constructing and working on the plurality of futures and narratives and science of the plurality of futures, but not in the institutional context of co-constructing with stakeholders in a CIRAD type space. How do those spaces connect and intersect? I'm not all saying I know the answer, but I think it's a really valid, important question. I mean, maybe there's some ideal answer of the ideal in between space, but I'm very actively interested in how we can and should create those spaces to connect these worlds while acknowledging that they're pretty different in some really basic ways, like who cuts your paycheck and like what what's happening that way. So thank you for that question. I really am think it leads to the next level of like what that connecting space can and should look like. And I think there are specific ideas about that. I mean, I think the more than human part of the second question, I think that's let me go back to the first one just a little bit. That plurality of solutions and that kind of plurality of voices and narratives, that's a part of what I hope to do and try incessantly to do. That that isn't the same as co-constructing with stakeholders, but maybe for the sake of argument, be provocative. It does do something. It does potentially bring out voices. It does potentially bring out things from the margins that co-constructing with stakeholders doesn't necessarily do. And that would be, I consider that at least the aspirational goal of that extremely important and of value. So that's a fuller response. And again, thank you for the question. Maybe on the more than human or other parts, I'll just turn the mic over to my colleagues.
Well, I think this is a new avenue which is opening. It is a very important one, which considers not only how human affects nature, but how nature affects us, and this is something that we are working on in our team at CEF, whether it be Sophie or myself. And becoming aware of the importance of how we are, touched and there are several groups in Montpellier working on this approach, and the sensorial or different way of doing research, also taking into consideration also our how we feel. I mean, about the objects, about the people, about the places where we work, is something which is part of this, I guess, transformative approach in science. So, I mean, this is underway. This is a really important, and it is part of, I guess, what Selim also says, that there is such a need for transformation of the way we do science. Co-constructing with several actors is one, but also considering other dimensions than production of data is another one, and considering how other than humans affect our way of working is one. And I think we are a lot, in fact, reflecting on this.
I'm going to interject and see if Marcela, did you want to weigh in here?
I'm just organizing my ideas because it's very, very stimulating for me. But yeah, I am really thinking about this very fertile question of a plurality of futures and things mentioned by the different collaborators, in which I feel that the margins in general are very fertile spaces to think about these potential futures as we mainstream the agency of all the different beings that are coordinating, overlapping their ways of being in a place. And I just keep thinking about something that Carl mentioned in terms of resilience, and in terms of the fact that we are all resilient just because we are here alive. We have this capacity to adapt to ever-changing or everlasting change. And I'm thinking with the bees, and how, for example, in places in which their habitats are being lost, they just start nesting in human places, in human homes, they just start, I don't know, adjusting their lives in those margins, and how people just engage in their creative potential at the margins. And then how all of these plural futures are found at the margins, but when we give some weight and or when we create some enable conditions for some of the possibilities, some possible futures to flourish, then we can change the trajectory of things. We had this amazing opportunity of seeing how the trajectory of everything can change in a moment, which was COVID. It changed so many things in such little time. And depending on the enabling conditions that were available, we could see communities in Peru just engaging or re-engaging in their creative potential to go back and create fertile lives. Something similar happened in Colombia, and most likely in many other places in the world. So to me, I don't know, I keep thinking about these margins and how what we know is already enough to know how to promote these enabling conditions to allow possibilities to flourish in those margins. That I need to organize much more my ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, very small comment. I think we believe that we need to have a plurality of future, we need a plurality of factor. We need a plurality of vision about the future. But I would like to just to mention what Selim said. I always talk about Selim today. I don't know why. We discussed one time in the office, and he said to me, "You see, there's many kind of legitimacy, and then it could be it's a crisis also. We have a biodiversity crisis, we have a climate change crisis, we have a global crisis." Global change crisis. We have the legitimacy crisis also that was based initially on know-how or on status. We have a researcher, we know how to write a protocol and how to produce a result. And this status, we have to remember that before the professor is talking, we keep quiet and we listen what the professor is saying, that's all. Okay, it was the legitimacy of the status, and the legitimacy of the result. It was into question, and we more and more ask, so what is the result, and is it a good result for what we would like to do with, and so on and so on. The legitimacy of the result is into question, and for now we are our legitimacy question is about the process, and all the legitimacy is sometimes only in the process. And we would like to co-construct the question, and we only talk about the process. We never talk about the question, and we don't know what we are aimed to, but we know how to do what we don't know where we are going to. And it's very curious that what we have to do, for me, we have to back to the result also, and to see it's not only the process, it's also the result, and what we aim together. Because there's a process and a collective process, and my feeling is that this step back to the legitimacy of the result is not enough in the process, if I can say, and it could be efficient for everybody to be faced to the result we have or the result we don't have, even if the process is absolutely co-construct. I don't want to mix what is the problem of the objective and what is the problem of the means or the know-how to reach this objective. But now the focus is too much on the process, on how to do, but not enough on what is the clearly efficient effect of how we are doing and what we aim, what is the effect we are looking for by working together, by making decision together, by defining the question together. And it should be interesting to see that sometimes the skill, some specialized skill are needed to reach the aim. And I'll spend this time to recognize that we need the specialization. But we have to spend time to not to back to the legitimacy of the statute, but back to the need to be different within the group, to work together and to reach the aim we are defined together.
Thanks. Thank you. Salim, excuse me, I'm going to have to introduce Animateur's privilege here, because I've been told if we don't get out of here soon, we won't get our cocktails. So we need our cocktails. And the best discussion always happens over cocktails. So I want to say thank you. And I want to say that it is a tribute to the reach and scope of Carl's work that we saw so many points of intersection today that could generate a vibrant discussion that would go on for days and days and days, which we don't have. So what we do have is cocktails. So thank you.